All right, let's go. What's up? What's up, y'all? Hope everybody's having a good afternoon. Today we're covering Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. And we're also going to dive into the film Velvet Buzzsaw from like 2017. And we're also going to go into sort of epical art history and talk about surrealism, because all of these play a constant sort of theme. They all have something to do with The Picture of Dorian Gray. And Dorian Gray is an amazing novel. Hope my volume's okay, everybody, today. Hope we got a full day today. We got a packed day. I'm on here early. Then we got Coteasy over at Church of the Eternal Logos with our homeboy Chase. They're also talking about art today. And then we've got JD later on today. So it's kind of a packed day. So I thought I'd get us started early, even though it's late in the afternoon. So today we're going to cover The Picture of Dorian Gray. And I thought I would go back to this one because we've taken a sort of a little respite there from Victorian literature. We've covered a bunch of Victorian literature here, actually. And so I thought I would get back to one of the old classics. And a bunch of people have recommended this over the past year, and I just never got to it. I mean, I've gotten to it. I've read the book a few times, but I haven't gotten to an analysis of it. First time I read this was December 21st, 1997. I read it again 2 years ago, and then I read it again yesterday. You can plow through it in a few hours. So it's a great book because of the motifs. And so what we're talking about here is how art can play havoc on the soul and obsession with art, especially in late Victorian in the late Victorian period. And this is a truly Wildean book. And I'm going to discuss what that means, talk about the form and the content in here. And I guess we should just dive in. What I'm going to do after this is do a kind of an analysis of Velvet Buzzsaw, which is I really enjoy the movie. It's a great movie. It's not just like, yes, it's an art satire, but it's a good movie because what's Jake Gyllenhaal's character's name? Morph, like Morph Vanderval. And, it has collectives. It's got modern art. And we've seen how modern art is sort of running rampant combined with the fashion industry recently, especially recently with events that people that we know that have covered in a deep analysis. So what I'm going to do is, and also shouts out to Chase, because Chase recommended that I go through some art, so some of the art history, because of the stream that we did the other night. What was the stream that we did the other night? I don't know. We've been plowing through them. So go back to my last stream. What was my last stream? My last stream was the one that I just did the other day. Oh, it was Midnight in Paris. I did Midnight in Paris. And we touched on Gauguin and Cézanne and Monet, and more of the literary history that's in the movie. But Chase recommended that, I sort of dive into this. People might be interested. I'm no art expert in terms of visual art, but I think I have a good enough grasp to give us kind of a cursory analysis of painting, especially with the Surrealist movement, because Surrealism is, I'm kind of lagging here, so I hope I do okay with the video. But Surrealism is interesting because of its explicit occult connections, which are that André Breton, the guy who wrote the Surrealist Manifesto 1 and 2, the founder of Surrealism, explicitly says that. And we're going to read some analysis of surrealistic art and talk about Tristan Tzara and Duchamp and Salvador Dali and Man Ray. And I'm going to go, I'll try to do as good of a job as I can of that in terms of a cursory analysis. You may be an art expert and you may go, oh, I don't know what he's talking about, but I think I do know what I'm talking about. But again, I'm no visual art expert, but that will play a role in terms of the literary nature of it in this book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, oftentimes called The Portrait of Dorian Gray. It's the picture. And so Oscar Wilde is known, anybody who knows about literature knows Oscar Wilde from his maxims, right? His final words, his deathbed words were, something along the lines of, one of us has got to go, either me or the wallpaper. Right. And he also has some, I don't know. One of his sayings was, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future, in terms of the way that, I think if you apply that to this book, because the book takes on a more metaphysical nature as it goes on. And one of the things that is apparent in the book is that Dorian Gray, the character Dorian Gray, the reason that he does what he does is because he is a Luciferian character who rails against any kind of metaphysics, and yet he's interested in it. But the irony is that he buys into this deal. There's no explicit deal in the book, but he buys into the deal where he can trade his soul for eternal youth. And there's a kind of a transference of his soul and his appearance onto the canvas, which he then hides away. And that's supposed to be a symbol of the fact that he is hiding his deeper self. Right. And so Velvet Buzzsaw does a great job of really being a kind of a Dorian Gray film, but it's sort of a reversal, because we see that the artworks themselves come alive, whereas in this, he comes alive the painting of Dorian Gray, the actual picture will come alive in a sense, but it will grow sort of organically as his sins accumulate. And so it's a slight reversal, but it's an interesting take on it. And I think that speaks to, number one, the obsession that, yes, just on the surface, like the kind of obsession that people have with art and with the art world, but also with people's obsession with their physical appearance and physical beauty, because a lot of the book Dorian Gray is about how people see themselves and how they want to see themselves. And I would call it, it's interesting because I would call it a Luciferian book in the sense that the entire narrative is structured around this kind of pride and his fall. It's essentially his, you would think it would be Dorian's like rise and fall, but it's his kind of continuous fall through life. And you went to school, Crispy went to school with a Derek Gray. Yes, that might have been Dorian's adopted brother. But interestingly enough, Dorian is sort of he is an illegitimate child, and then his grandfather is named what's his name? Lord Kelso, like in that 70s show. And he makes his way through society, but it's kind of a continuous fall that he doesn't see himself. So anyway, enough rambling. Let's dive into the book. What the book is about is basically we're in the late Victorian period, 1837 and 1901. The book was written in 1890. And this is before before Oscar Wilde's Ballad of Reading Gaol, before he was locked up, right? And it really is a kind of homage to the late Victorian period, and it sort of places a mirror in front of society in terms of Victorian mores and morals. And again, there's a tendency to call a book like this like a fable, right? That you're supposed to take a moral, there's a moral of the story. And there are certainly morals and ethical considerations within the narrative. But I think it's pretty clear when you read the book that so it's also one of those books where you read it and you know that he's going to fall. It's not really a tragedy, because you almost want him to fall, right? Even though he's already fallen in a double sense. But at the end we have a resolution, a very brief resolution in the book, where we see where these temptations sort of lead. But that's ironic, because Oscar Wilde is often like confused himself with the character Dorian Gray. And this is what I'm always talking about here. Not always, but I kind of find myself continuously talking about this, which is the difference between the writer and the speaker in the novel. There's a clear difference. And this is a great example of that, because that picture of Oscar Wilde that you see, maybe I should look it up and show you here. I'll try to boomer tech it here and show you guys. See if I can find this Oscar Wilde, the picture of him. So let's see. So Oscar Wilde, you may have seen the famous picture of Oscar Wilde. And just to show you here. So that's Oscar Wilde, right? And we've got this picture right here. And he's in his dandy clothes, and he's got his cane. And then we've got this one here from Town and Country, and he's in his late Victorian garb and all that. And he looks sort of like the pose of a younger artist here. Here he is reclining. Well, did you know that all these pictures were taken on a single occasion? So that's one of the illusions. And again, this is this is kind of meta, because it's one of the illusions of visual arts, right? In that we have this tendency to think that this is Oscar Wilde through the ages. I mean, he died fairly young, but that this is him. This is him reclining, and that he's always like this, and he's always in these poetic poses, right? This one's at the British Library. But the fact is that these were all taken on a single occasion on a trip to America, when he had the chance to be photographed. And so it's just another illusion. And we tend to think of the speaker of a novel and the art and the writer being the same thing. And Shakespeare is a great example of this. It's that's what all the controversies are about, right? Is that you know, who wrote it, right? Well, we can't tell because he didn't write the word Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare never signed. We don't have any extant examples of his signatures, of his signature, singular signature. But it's the same thing with Oscar Wilde. It's like, it doesn't matter what the writer himself says or does in terms of like his autobiography. What matters is the thing that lasts. And he will say that in the book, because that's his art that he's putting in the book. And once he puts pen to page, that becomes the speaker of the novel, right? It's its own life. So let me read you the preface to the book, because he has his preface to this, which is it's full of maxims. It's like everything. One of the annoying things about Wilde, and Wilde being a Anglo-Irish writer, one of the great Anglo-Irish writers. I was in 2 plays of his. I played Lord Darlington, and then I was in one of his children's plays. It was The Fisherman and His Soul. And that was in Belfast. And the other one was in England. Anyway, he has a tendency to write as if everything that he says is to be quotable. And that's sort of his persona. I mean, who knows about the real Wilde and who he was, but his persona is one where Dorian Gray becomes like a comedy of manners, like Wilde's plays. And this is sort of the way the preface is written. I'm going to read the preface in whole. It says, "The artist is the creator of beautiful things. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim." There you go. That's what I just said, right? "The critic is he who can translate into another manner or new material his impression of beautiful things." So delineation between the artist and the critic. "The highest, as the lowest form of criticism, is a mode of autobiography. Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. Those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are the cultivated. For these, there is hope. They are the elect to whom beautiful things mean only beauty." So he's talking about the Keatsian sense of beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. He says, he then says, "There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all." Now, what he's saying there is what it kind of, to me, what that means is like how Robert Pinsky, I met the poet laureate Robert Pinsky in 1998. And I asked him about, because I was 17 at the time, I think, and I asked him about the beat generation and like what he thought of beat writers. I've said this before, and his response baffled me at the time, but then it made sense to me later on. It was pretty adept. And he said, in literature and in art, let's take art for example. You have Surrealism, Cubism, Impressionism, Abstract Expressionism, Classicism. You've got all these various schools of art and forms of art and genres. In literature, you have Romanticism. You've got the confessional poets, the fireside poets, the American transcendentalists, the neoclassical poets, all these different circles. But really, those don't matter. The only ones that matter are good and bad. There are really only 2 circles. There's the almost endless, infinite circle, nearly. It's kind of I guess that's a contradiction to say nearly infinite circle of bad writers, and then you've got a very, very small circle of good writers or good writing. Really, it's not even good writers; it's good writing. I mean, look at, for example, I don't know, Walt Whitman, right? Walt Whitman wrote Song of Myself. He wrote A Noiseless Patient Spider. He wrote a lot of poems, but only a few of them are good. Allen Ginsberg wrote tons and tons, almost endless trash. But the ones that are recognized as good, like Sunflower Sutra or Supermarket California or Howl, are the 3 that are sort of in the canon, right? Occasionally we have a writer that everything that they wrote is nearly perfect. Like I would say Rimbaud, and we're going to talk about him later with Surrealism. But even Shakespeare is considered that way. But even Shakespeare, we just did Titus Andronicus, and Titus Andronicus is rarely performed. The poem King John is like a total bore. And it's still elevated above, well above a lot of the other contemporary poems and plays of the time. But we have this very small circle in the canon, and so I guess that's what he's talking about here. He's also talking about that finding a moral, not amoral as one word, but finding a moral in a work like this is sort of incidental. One can find that, but to take it away as a fable, it is not. It's almost, the book almost serves as a proto snapshot. It's almost a portrait because it is literally a picture of a guy, right? Later on in the stream, when we talk about the surrealists, we'll talk about the famous surrealist painting that says "Ce n'est pas un pipe," right? It says this is not a pipe, and it's a joke, right? Because it's not a pipe, it's a painting of a pipe, but it's still a pipe that you're looking at, which is the symbol of the pipe, but it's a visual representation of the pipe, but it's not actually a pipe. Anyway, he says the 19th century dislike of realism is the rage of Caliban seeing his own face in a glass, in a mirror. That reminds me of that Patton poem that I just read. I was talking about it on Maddie's stream. Shouts out to Digital Minefield out there. Because George S. Patton wrote a poem through the mists of the ages. We see through a glass darkly, which is from Corinthians, right? And he's saying here that Caliban, he says the 19th century dislike of realism is the rage of Caliban seeing his own face in a glass, which is to say that the ugliness of the Victorian era, the ugly parts of it, certainly, and what sort of overrides it, because this is a long period in art and literature, becomes the rage of the beast man seeing his own reflection in the glass. He says the 19th century dislike of romanticism is the rage of Caliban not seeing his own face in a glass, because Caliban is also a romantic figure. We've covered The Tempest here. He says the moral life of man forms part of the subject matter of the artist, but the morality of art consists in the perfect use of an imperfect medium. No artist desires to, and also there's a pun on the word medium there, because we're going to see, especially with painting and surrealism, that being a medium for some sort of other spirit or entity will play a part, specifically in surrealism. No artist desires to prove anything. Even things that are true can be proved. No artist has ethical sympathies. An ethical sympathy is an artist is an unpardonable mannerism of style, because he's talking about didacticism there. Somebody asked me a question a while back about why I had said in one of the streams that didacticism is like what does Ezra Pound say? Better mendacities than the classics and paraphrase. And he talks about didacticism is a kind of a clotted axle. At least that's how I think of it. It's like, instead of being teachy, right, to the viewer or to the reader, show, don't tell. And when you are didactic in your literature, you're assuming a moral superiority, and you don't necessarily deserve that, first of all, in terms of your art. But it's what we are to see from it and what we're to glean from the meaning. That's not always true. Some art is didactic purposely. Like Pilgrim's Progress, right? John Bunyan is didactic. So the Scarlet Letter could be argued, you could argue that that's partly didactic, but it works because the form and the content fit. Thought and language are to the artist instruments of an art. He says vice and virtue are to the artist materials for an art. And that we see that certainly is true. And that's especially in, secular art. And I'm sure Cotel and Chase will talk about that later. From the point of view of form, the type of all the arts is the artist of the musician. From the point of view of feeling, the actor's craft is the art. All art is at once surface and symbol. So it's literal and figurative. This is great. It's literal and figurative. And when he says that it's the form of the musician, this is like 20 or 30 years. Is it 20? It's I guess this is 29 years ahead of Ezra Pound talking about rules for poetry in the post-Victorian world, where instead of, for instance, in literature, instead of the line being one that's like a metronome, right, da 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 da, it has to take on a musical cadence, which is more lyrical and rather less mathematical, which it had come to be in the Victorian era. Those who go beneath the surface do so at their peril. Those who read the symbol do so at their peril. It is the spectator and not life that art really mirrors. He's talking about the mirror here because the portrait or the picture in Dorian Gray will be the mirror. He says, diversity of opinion about a work of art shows that the work is new, complex, and vital. When critics disagree, the artist is in accord with himself. We can forgive a man for making a useful thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. All art is quite useless. Well, that's an interesting end statement for his preface, because number one, it is foreshadowing that the picture in Dorian Gray will be useless. It will have no use. Dorian Gray himself will have no usefulness in society. He uses people and he uses himself and he uses the art to advance, but he doesn't ever make any sort of advancements, no societal advancements really, because everything he does is mirrored. So whenever he, for instance, has a sexual conquest, or he purchases a lot of antiques, or he is rich and handsome and famous and all this stuff, we always see it in a kind of an inverted mirror where there's always somebody else that's going, there's something's not right about this dude. Why does first of all, he never ages, right? So what the book is about is that there's a painter, and he's a portrait painter, and he has recently painted a portrait of a youth, and he's like in his salon, and he's talking about how, it's the best thing that he's ever painted, and that he's really captured the spirit of beauty in a way that will form a whole new school of art, he even says. And that's interesting because again, this is like sort of prefiguring the modernist era, prefiguring modernity, a whole new school of art. And then we meet up with this guy this guy becomes like a mentor to Dorian, because we're not introduced to Dorian yet. And he's like this guy's really a Lucifer character. He's an English lord. And basically, he shocks society because everything that he says is kind of clever and witty, but it's sort of the reverse of how you think things are. He's a contrarian, but he's a contrarian with wit. And then when they meet Dorian Gray is, he's an English youth, and he comes in and he's the subject of the portrait, and he sees that, wow, I really am the most beautiful thing ever painted ever, right? Is what goes on in the story. He's like, I'm the most, he can clearly see that, like, this becomes a Narcissus myth, where he looks at his own image, and he sort of calls out to it, but the echo gets lost, and he speaks to himself on the canvas, right? And so then what happens is he, as time goes on, he is influenced by his mentor, and then he gets hold of the portrait, and he like shows the picture, and everybody wants to come see this. And then what happens is his mentor guy says, hey, let's go and debauch ourselves. We'll go to the English theater or whatever. They go to a kind of a cheap side penny theater, and then he sees this girl. Her name is Sybil Vane. Okay, so it's kind of obvious pun on the name here, but the Sybil, right? Nam Sibylam, is the epigraph to T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, and is a mythological figure where the Sybil is the interpreter of the oracle, right? And in the Wasteland, right, in the epigraph, she's locked up in a cage in hell, and she says she wants to die. That's the epigraph. And Vane, because she's a mirror of. First of all, she's an actress, and she's a mirror of Dorian's beauty because, so she's vain, and she's also like a weather vane. She's pointing the way that the narrative will progress. So he sees this actress and he falls in love with her. She's a Shakespearean actress. And he falls in love with her and shouts out to Hirsch out there for that $5 super chat. Hirsch says her teeth look like white seeds in a scarlet fruit. I always like that line. Well, thank you for that super chat. Really appreciate you, homeboy. Oscar Wilde is such a magnificent writer. He's eloquent and exquisite in a way that his prose it's almost too exquisite, and it sort of overrides the sense of reality of where you are in the narrative, and that's kind of the point. He's like he's constantly shocking you and overwhelming your senses with the lyrical beauty of the things that he writes, because that's what happens to Dorian. So Dorian's mentor is like, no, you can't ever get married. Bachelors must never get married, essentially is what he says, which is a paradoxical maxim. And Dorian's like, no, I'm going to fall in love with her. Well, he gets the portrait and he locks it up. And at one point he goes, I'm kind of skipping over some things, but he goes back to the theater. He sees his love. And then he realizes that he's not in love with this woman. And she comes to him and she's like, we're going to get married. It's been in all the papers. There's this high society folks. So they announce their wedding. And then he tells her, I never want to see you again. You don't interest me. You bore me. And then he leaves. And then he finds out that she's committed suicide. Right. Well, his mentor tells him, no, you're better to be off with, only the plebs are guided by their emotions as such. Well, she's had her heart broken, and you didn't do this to her. She did it herself, and she never even existed in the first place, is what he tells Dorian. And so what's happening here is that Dorian is beginning to think that his actions don't have consequences and that he can do whatever he wants. He lives with impunity. And then he goes back to look at his portrait and he sees that in his picture, a little marks, a sly expression has begun to creep into the painting that wasn't there before. And that's as a result of the real world and his physical actions and what he did to this girl. And so as time goes on, he sins more and more in much more depraved and debaucherous ways. And every time he does so, it shows up on the painting, but he never gets old, because when he was first admiring the picture, he told his mentor, he said that he would give his soul to exist as he does in the painting forever. Now that's the irony. Do you get it? That because he is forever young. He's forever young in the artwork. That's what art does. It makes him forever, as long as the painting exists, right? And it's well taken care of, and it's kept out of sunlight, and it's maybe restored later on. All that stuff. It can last 1,000 years. It can last forever. And it will be him, but it won't be the animated figure. It won't be animated in the sense that it will not have anima. It won't have a soul. And that he, as a person, can also, there is a way that he can remain forever young, or at least innocent and youthful, in the sense that at the end of the book, he is confronted by one of his old associates, one of the guys that he knew from at the beginning of the book. And the guy tells him that he found religion and that he needs to go to a church right now and repent because there's still time for him. And Dorian will say, no, there's no time left. He already sold his soul, right? Is what he says in the book. But there is time for him, right? But instead of taking the time to, to confess and to ask God for forgiveness and to join in the beauty of the resurrection and everlasting life, instead he decides to take life. So as the story goes on, so at that point in the beginning of the book, he essentially sells his soul, but it's not like a deal like in, it's not like a cheap horror movie or something like that. It's more of a metaphor that we see, no lightning strikes when this happens, but we see that some sort of magical transference is taking place in the book, right? Well, So as time goes on and everybody else starts getting older, he stays young, but he hides his portrait away. He locks it up in the attic and he covers it so that the canvas can't see the daylight. So it's hidden in darkness. So his sins are hidden away in darkness, just like they're hidden inside of himself. And he constantly tells himself that he can do whatever he wants because it doesn't matter, because it'll just show up on the painting, but it's not real to him. Because it's not in his physical form and physical creation. So as the story goes on, again, he becomes more and more debauched. He essentially, like, you read into it that he becomes an opium addict. He drinks. He travels the world to these exotic locations. He goes to Venice. He goes to all these places. He goes to, and then he starts to see that, like, living a life according to the senses will not help him. Like, it's not doing anything for him, and he's not feeling anything. And that's, again, another paradox in the thing, because all he wants to do is feel. He wants to feel. He lives according to feeling. But he gains all of his knowledge through his, he's an empiricist. He gains all of his knowledge through his senses, but he begins to realize that, like, he has no more senses. He becomes a complete psychopath, and he has no feeling for anybody, and he just exists to use other people. And then he's confronted by a guy who wants to take a look at the painting, and eventually Dorian's like, "You want to see the painting? You want to see what's happening? I can show you what my sins look like." And he takes him up to the attic, and he reveals the painting, and the guy looks at it, and the guy's horrified, because at this point the picture of Dorian is like a total demon man. He's this, like, gross, demonic looking figure who's grown old before his time, so all of his sins are visible in the painting. And the guy, like, sort of shrieks, and Dorian, who took a knife up there to cut the cloth to cover it, sees the glint of the knife and stabs the guy in the neck and kills him. So now he's a murderer. So then he goes in search of this other guy that he knew, Alan, and he's like, "Yo, can you help me out? I need help doing something." And the guy's like, "I'm not helping you at all. I've heard all about you. I've heard all the rumors. You're like a disgusting dude. No, I don't want anything to do with you. Like, you're into sick stuff." And he's like, he convinces him to go up there, and eventually he convinces the guy to go up because the guy is an expert at disposing of a body. So he takes the body and he, puts it in nitric acid or some shit. I don't know, something. And he gets rid of the body, just like sort of Dorian has gotten rid of his own corpus in a way, because now he exists in this sort of permanent alabaster, Apollo Belvedere marble, but plasticine and moving shell with no soul. And so then life goes on, it keeps going on. And then he's confronted by he's confronted by this dude who has been following him. And the guy says, "I've been following you, and I'm here to kill you because you're the cause of my sister's suicide." So he's gonna kill him. And Dorian gets out of it by saying, "Look, when did this happen?" And the guy says, "Oh, it happened 18 years ago." And he says, 18 years ago? Look at me. I'm 18 years old now. I couldn't have done this. And the guy says, "Oh, you're right." So it works in his favor. But then what happens is he eventually, like, he is at the end of the book, he's cornered by the dude and a woman who are convinced that Dorian has, partaken in some sort of Al Crowley magical ritual or something, and that he's living forever. He's a vampire, basically. And that it's cool because he's a vampire, but he's not a vampire in the Dracula sense. He's a vampire that is, like, living on the blood of his sin in a way. And I'm not saying that's cool. I'm saying the way the narrative is structured is cool. And then eventually he goes upstairs. He kills two more people. He goes upstairs. He sees the painting, and then he's at the the apex of his life. He knows that he has to confront himself, and he takes the knife and he stabs the painting. And when he stabs the painting, he stabs into himself, and he dies. The house catches fire, and so his whole house of his life is sort of burned down. And then a quick resolution. We see some people come to the house and they see the uncovered painting, and the painting is the perfect picture of Dorian as he was, and he is a shriveled old corpse, and he's dead. So that's it. Yeah. Shouts out to OK. OK says Colin Firth is usually good in films based on classic Brit lit. I watched the film of this, the Dorian Gray film, and I thought it was not bad. I liked it because I thought it was done pretty true to the book. And I liked that they sort of updated the unspoken things in the book in terms of showing it in the movie. So, for instance, the guy who plays Dorian Gray is Ben Barnes. He's my age. And Ben Barnes is an English actor, and he was actually the son of Delios in Westworld. That might be another reason why I liked it, because I liked him in that. But in that, as he goes on, he becomes basically an opium addict and kind of a heroin addict. Then he goes and one thing that they show in the movie that's cool is like he goes and he sees war, and war is supposed to be the kind of final onslaught of the senses so that he can feel something, right? Because he just wants to feel something. And he still doesn't. And then of course he starts taking life, and that is supposed to subsume his bloodlust, and it really doesn't. I thought that Colin Firth was good in it because he plays such he's such an arrogant prig, right? He's which is what his character's supposed to be. I thought that also in the movie, he goes into total fake and gray territory and complete debauchery, and that makes sense for this character because he's a psychopath, and he's just he's a total empiricist, and he just wants to satiate his lust for life, I suppose. So I thought the film was actually pretty well done. It's hard to actually to make an Oscar Wilde film because you're always aware when you're watching it that you're watching an Oscar Wilde film. I mean, the trappings of his literature are like, they're so obvious because they're so surface level, as they're supposed to be. What we're supposed to see with Wildean literature is that we're supposed to see the beautiful trappings of physical art and physical reality, and think because of the wit and the maxims involved that's it. But actually, the clever thing about him is that he's actually pointing to the figurative nature of art and what is and the purpose of life. And I really like the book because in the Rising Action we see that Dorian is confronted with his soul's perdition. And you would think that this would not be the case if you hadn't read Wilde. You would think that it would be all complete. It would just be totally be on the surface. But in fact, not even Oscar Wilde, but his literature is clever because he points to the fact that, look, if beauty is supposed to be eternal, then there has to be something eternal. And if it's not eternal, if beauty is only skin deep, which is what his mentor character in this says. What's his name? Harry, Lord Henry Wotton. That Dorian thinks that it's like what Norm said, like nobody cares about what's on the inside. It's only the physical appearance that matters. That's the only thing people care about, right? Which is obviously ironic because that's what people think that they care about. But nature's her screen is gold, her heart is to you to hold, right? Nature is constant. It remains the same, but it's through cycles and continuously changing. It's eternal, but through change. But there has to be something that is eternal, that is true to Oscar Wilde, and that is his eternal soul, right? And so he's going to face perdition if he cannot come to grips with the fact that he's not forever young, if that makes sense. So, so let's see. So it says, I mean, the maxims in the first chapter are pretty clever. A man cannot be too careful in his choice of enemies. I quite sympathize with the rage of the English democracy against what they call the vices of the upper orders. The masses feel that drunkenness, stupidity, and immorality should be their own special property, and that if any one of us makes an ass of himself, he is poaching on their preserves, which is a clever way of saying that, you know, the plebs look at the elites, and the elites think that they can do whatever they want, which they do. And they think that this is their own special territory. But in fact, anybody can debauch themselves. Well, anybody can sort of do what they want in a libertarian sense, is what he's saying about the plebs here, and how they don't like the elite structure because of this. This is a great book about the ways that the elites navigate and look at laws and morals and mores as just things to be trampled on, right? They're things to be used. And he says here on page 27, if one puts forward an idea to a true Englishman, always a rash thing to do, he never dreams of considering whether the idea is right or wrong. The only thing he considers of any importance is whether one believes it oneself. Now, the value of an idea has nothing whatsoever to do with the sincerity of the man who expresses it. And then he looks at Dorian Gray and he says, here is all, this is what the painter says. Here's all my art to me now, said the painter gravely. I sometimes think, Harry, that Harry is the Lucifer character, that there are only two eras of any importance in the world's history. The first is the appearance of a new medium for art, and the second is the appearance of a new personality for art also, which is what Velvet Buzzsaw is about. What the invention of oil painting was to the Venetians, the face of Antinois was to late Greek sculpture, and the face of Dorian Gray will someday be to me. There's nothing that art cannot express. And I know that the work I've done since I met Dorian Gray is good work, is the best work of my life. But in some curious way, I wonder, will you understand me? His personality has suggested to me an entirely new manner of art, which is kind of crazy, because that also mirrors Wilde himself, in that Wilde represents one of the first like mega world stars, a mega celebrity who arises and sort of transcends just literature and drama and art, and is a societal figure. I mean, you know, people talk in American history about like Longfellow did that, which may be true. I mean, Byron, we did a stream on Byron. Byron is kind of a proto-Wilde figure, obviously. Really, before Byron, there's nobody that really does that. Somebody that is so popular, they're not just respected as an artist, but they are popular in like a pinup sense. Like women have his portrait in their homes, right? And that's true of Byron. And you can see from the Wilde pictures that Wilde saw himself in that way and was that figure. I mean, yes, he was. Yes, he was. He went. That's Wilde was convicted of that. He was a convicted SOD word. That's why he went to Reading Gaol. We were talking about Rimbaud the other day, and that's also the reason that Verlaine was convicted. Verlaine shot Rimbaud in the wrist and was convicted of that. But in the trial, they talk about him being a sod, and creeping on Rimbaud. And so Wilde was the ultimate sort of societal dandy figure like that. And we can see that exists even now. I mean, look at culture now. That is Wilde. That's Oscar Wilde. Like that is what it is now, right? Remember, Tristan just posted that article. Shouts out to Tristan, Primal Edge Health, posted that article about makeup and how it makes you more masculine. That's Oscar Wilde. That's Oscar Wilde in contemporary, great reset territory. He talks about the Platonic forms here, a dream of form in days of thought. Who is it who says that? I forget, but It is what Dorian Gray has been to me, the merely visible presence of this lad, for he seems to me little more than a lad, though he is really over 20. His merely visible presence, I wonder, can you realize all that means? Unconsciously, he defines for me the lines of a fresh school, a school that is to have in it all the passion of the romantic spirit, all the perfection of the spirit that is Greek. So what he's doing here is he's making a painting of an actual person that symbolizes to him as the artist and to the viewers everywhere of the art in the book, eternal youth. And in a sense, again, the past is prologue. I mean, that's what the statues of Apollo are. That's what the statues of the Greek emperors are. That's what, Greco-Roman art is all the time. It's putting the physical form in marble and making it something that's supposed to be eternal. But what it does here to Dorian Gray, because he's a real person in the book, is that it's I don't know, it's not fair to say it goes to his head. That's too little of a statement. It absorbs into him in a completely purely narcissistic way. Like, this is actual narcissism. The book is really just a retelling of the myth of Narcissus. And he gets lost in his own reflection. An artist, on page 29, an artist should create beautiful things, but should put nothing in his own life into them. Okay, I said that at the beginning. We live in an age when men treat art as if it were meant to be a form of autobiography, which is like what the confessional poets did in the mid-20th century with Sylvia Plath and Robert Lowell and Theodore Rothke. Now that is slightly different for them and works for them, and all art is, in a sense, autobiographical. But what he's talking about here is the self-portrait, right? So he's not making a self-portrait. We have lost the abstract sense of beauty. Someday I will show the world what it is, and for that reason, the world shall never see my portrait of Dorian Gray. So this ties into Velvet Buzzsaw because in a way, the ultimate artist is one of two things. And this is my own hot take, but the ultimate artist is one of two things. And the two are sort of dialectical, right? They are completely divergent. One is the artist who creates and everyone sees it. Everyone, it's disseminated everywhere. It's Shakespeare, or it's Oscar Wilde, and everyone knows it. The other is the artist who creates art that no one sees. And this is kind of, this is Rimbaud. Rimbaud was published in his lifetime, but at that point, he was gone to Africa to be a gun runner. Or it's Van Gogh, or it's like in Velvet Buzzsaw. So Velvet Buzzsaw is about an outsider artist who is this man. It's kind of based on a couple of real figures, but the paintings themselves are based on Francis Bacon and Gerhard Richter and some other painters that I'll talk about. But it's a guy who lives. They discovered this years ago. I read about this in an article from the I think University of Chicago. There was a guy who was a janitor for years, and when he died, he left. He had no family. He left no heirs, and when they were cleaning out his apartment, they found like an enormous lifelong collection, a stash of all of his own personal art. And then they put it on display, and it's what Velvet Buzzsaw is about. The guy is like, he's an old man, and we never see his face. His name is Dietz, and he dies. And his art creates a firestorm in the art world, a bidding war. Everybody wants this art, but it's cursed because, for one, in Velvet Buzzsaw, the character painted all of the art with. There's a woman in the movie who Morph, Jake Gyllenhaal, goes to see, and she says she did an extensive study of his artwork, and that she found blood plasma on a discarded Kleenex when they were cleaning out his collection, and that she matched it to all of his art. So in other words, he painted all of his art with his own blood. This is kind of a Francis Bacon thing, not Francis Bacon, the Renaissance figure, Francis Bacon, the Anglo-Irish painter in the 20th century. And so So in the movie, that takes on a much more occult significance because it's like it's like he's giving his own blood and his own soul to his artwork, and so it becomes animated with his spirit. But in this, we see an artist who creates the perfect painting and then doesn't want anyone to see it. But then again, the sort of meta level irony is that Dorian himself is the art, right? Because there's this transference of spirit. And so now he's the living work of art. And that also is interesting because the living theater, you know, and sort of multimedia art and living art is definitely a postmodern way of, not a fad, but it's like that's the way that we still see art today. Like, I mean, look at Marinka, right? Marinka's art is performance art. So it's supposed to be that you can only experience the art if you are there in the moment in that time. And that's supposed to be something special and significant. I read before, or I discussed how Jim Carroll, the poet Jim Carroll, who's great, white ship disappears into a blood machine this morning. Her eyes got shot with secret chains. The pill army's eventually set free. And that's good that there are too many windows to open halfway each morning and close halfway each night. Jim Carroll wrote the Basketball Diaries. And there's the film with Leo. It's a good film. And he, in his sequel to the book called Forced Entries, which is a triple pun, he's working at like the MoMA and he's an assistant to somebody. And then they say, oh, you know, he like, they assume he's an artist. And then he goes and he gets the bug spray and the lighter and he like traps a cockroach and the cockroach is running across the floor and he like flame throws the cockroach. And they say, oh, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of postmodern art. It's about, you know, everyone living in the bug pod city and how we're flame throwed by society. And he's like, yeah, it's just bullshit. You know, I just did it. And he got in Art News or whatever. But it's also like, you remember a couple years ago with the banana duct taped to the canvas, which is anybody watching. I mean, surely that's a self-reference to Duchamp, who posted the urinal on the wall. And it was like 1919, and he called it the fountain. And everybody said, oh, this is brilliant because the urinal is like, it's like where the waste goes, and the waste is supposed to be, the urinal like symbolizes post-World War I society and how we've all gone down the drain. And we're all basically, you know, we are all pissed or whatever. And he just meant it as it's just a piece on a wall. It's just a joke, right? And I don't know if he meant it that way. And like Oscar Wilde was saying, like, or the speaker in the book especially is saying, it doesn't matter how he meant it, it's how he presented it, right? And there probably is some truth, by the way, to talking about that in terms of the Duchamp piece. The banana piece is also clearly some sort of meta joke, and it's about the, I don't know, what is that? The fact that the art world is bananas, Bananas. It's Gwen Stefani bananas. Or that, you know, we're all the art world is made for the animalistic beasts of the jungle of the art world or some bullshit. I don't know. Really, it's just a banana posted on a thing, and they paid, you know, an incredible amount of money for. But whatever. So the irony in this is that Dorian himself becomes the living artwork, right? There's so many cultural references in this. I mean, they go to Wagner, they talk about Wagner, they go to Lohengrin on page 62. That was at Lohengrin, Lady Henry. Yes, it was at Dear Lohengrin. I like Wagner's music better than anybody's. It is so loud that one can talk the whole time without other people hearing what one says. That is a great advantage. Don't you think so, Mr. Gray? Which is actually a pretty clever statement on Wagner and, you know, the high society gatherings, right? Where they're there to see high art, but don't pay attention to it at all. And they can talk through the thing. And that is sort of the way that the elites work, right? You buying $100 million painting, displaying it in a hedge fund office so that other people will see it, but it has no meaning itself, right? It's, you know, an abstract expressionist piece or whatever. Lohengrin is interesting because it's the Night of the Swan. I should do a stream on Wagner and the Ring Cycle. Maybe I'll do that later. And Arthurian literature, but it's the Night of the Swan, and that's interesting because the swan is the poet. So that's sort of Wilde placing himself, probably not consciously within the narrative, but symbolizing the artist and his swan song, right? Because making the most beautiful sound before one dies. And also the Swan Theater, right, in England, that burned, and Shakespeare, and then the swan is sort of the figure of eternal youth. He says, okay, later on page 63, he says, never marry at all, Dorian. Men marry because they are tired, women because they are curious. Both are disappointed. And I wrote down on the bottom here, this is an anti, like A-N-T-E, like antebellum, or a proto, this is anti-modernity. It's an anti-modernity statement. And it's obviously reactionary to the Victorian morals and mores, right? Where one, especially in elite society, is supposed to follow the rules and marry and do all those things. And yet Dorian himself is kind of an adopted figure, at least they say that his mother was an American, kind of like Winston Churchill, right? His mother was an American or an American actress, or like Poe, even though he's pure 100% American, but an American actress, and that there was a shame involved with that, and that his grandfather, Lord Kelso, adopts him under his name. And then he meets the Sybil, or Sybil Vane, on page 64. My dear boy, no woman is a genius. Women are a decorative sex. They never have anything to say, but they say it charmingly. Women represent the triumph of matter over mind, just as men represent the triumph of mind over morals. Now, that is certainly an elitist mantra, in terms of Henry saying it here, but it's also interesting because it is the guy saying this in the book is fake and gray, right? So really what he's saying is you don't want that because he wants him all for himself. Just like Dorian is also fake and gray because he wants himself. That is gray, right? That he looks at himself and thinks that he's the most attractive person in the world and that like nobody will ever be as beautiful as himself. That's weird. Page one thing I realized when reading this is a pretty big revelation to me when reading this, is that and I'm sure people have written academic papers about this or done their graduate work on it, maybe, I don't know, but is it Skittles to be attracted to yourself? Yes. Yes. It is. It's not Skittles to take care of yourself, right? But to be attracted to yourself, yes, for sure. That's crazy. Self-love and self-care, right? Like, do unto others as one would have others, as one do unto others as you would have others do unto you, right? You love yourself because you value, your life and what God has created. I'm not giving advice here. Obviously, no one asked me for advice. Not that I would give it or take it, but I'm just saying, in terms of the question, in terms of the narrative here, one must be, I guess, that one, you value your life and that what you've been given, right? And then you try to take care of yourself, but attraction is totally different, right? So what was I saying? What I realized as far as the revelation in this was that Bret Easton Ellis is but Bret Easton Ellis is a sort of revised and renovated and postmodern version of what Oscar Wilde was. I mean, they're essentially, they have the same book here, because this really, in a lot of ways, is a Bateman story. We did our American Psycho analysis. You can go back and watch that. And Dorian is in love with himself in pretty much all of the same ways that Bateman is, especially when it comes to. I just think that Patrick Bateman is a kind of is a quasi Wildean figure. I fancied 1,000 things. The mere dangers, this is page 65, gave me a sense of delight. I remember what you said to me on that wonderful evening when we first dined together about the search for beauty being the real secret of life. I don't know what I expected, but I went out and wandered eastward, soon losing my way in a labyrinth of grimy streets and black grassless squares. About 8:30, I passed by an absurd little theater. And I beheld the most vulgar people, right? This is, I mean, that's like a Bateman statement. Slumming it, right? He tells, at this point in the book on page 68, he tells Harry that Sybil Vane, Harry is the short, that Sybil Vane is sacred. It's interesting he uses the word sacred, right? Sacré-Cœur is sacred because that implies worship, and he's found another person to worship. But in his sense, we know that he's going to deny that because he's going to deny worship only at the altar of himself. And let's see, Gnosticism, page 74. Soul and body, body and soul, how mysterious they were. There was animalism in the soul, and the body had its moments of spirituality. The senses could refine and the intellect could degrade. Who could say where the fleshly impulse ceased or the psychical impulse began? How shallow were the arbitrary definitions of ordinary psychologists, and yet how difficult to decide between the claims and the various schools. Was the soul a shadow seated in the house of sin, or was the body really in the soul, as Giordano Bruno thought? The separation of spirit from matter was a mystery, and the union of spirit with matter was a mystery also. This reminded me of Rimbaud in A Season in Hell, where he says, he says, hell is certainly down below, and that we have one body and one soul. And this is his Gnostic journey through illumination, but where his illumination takes him is different from where the Dorian character takes his, which is to question what a soul is in the first place. And if he has one, he realizes he can only be satiated by trying to break on through, which is weird because it's like, is he trying to break on through to the other side from his painting? Because his painting is the real him, but it lacks anima, it lacks soul. Whereas he is sort of this plastic physical shell without one. So the body sort of divides into the body and soul divide into two in the story. And then Dorian turns cruel to the Sybil right after this because he realizes he can only feel things by being cruel. Cruelty. Had he been cruel, it was the girl's fault, not his. He had dreamed of her, page 106, as a great artist, had given his love to her because he had thought her great. Then she had disappointed him. She had been shallow and untrustworthy, and yet a feeling of infinite regret came over him as he thought of her lying at his feet sobbing. He remembered with what callousness he'd watched her. Why had he been made like that? Why had such a soul been given to him? As if the soul is being given to him, right? But he had suffered also. During the 3 terrible hours that the play had lasted, he had lived creatures of pain, eon upon eon of torture. His life was well worth hers. She had marred him for a moment if he had wounded her for an age. Besides, women were better suited to bear sorrow than men. They lived on their emotions. They only thought of their emotions. When they took lovers, it was merely to have someone with whom they could have scenes. Lord Henry had told him that, and Lord Henry knew what women were. Why should he trouble Sybil Vane? She was nothing to him now. But the picture, what was he to say of that? It held the secret of his life and told his story. It had taught him to love his own beauty. Would it teach him to loathe his own soul? Would he ever look at it again? And then he dives into opiates on page 110. There were opiates for remorse, drugs that could lull the moral sense to sleep. But here was a visible symbol of the degradation of sin. Here was an ever-present sign of the ruin men brought upon their own souls, his painting. Again, later on, how art conceals the artist. Crowned with heavy, on page 129, crowned with heavy lotus blossoms, you had sat on the prow of Adrian's barge, gazing across the green turbid Nile. It seemed to me that I'd been foolish in imagining that I'd seen anything in it, more than that you were extremely good looking and that I could paint. Form and color tell us of form and color. That is all. It often seems to me that art conceals the artist from for more completely than it ever reveals him. The portrait must be hidden away at all costs on page 131. Epicureanism and empiricism occur on page 144 and 145. Shouts out to David Franco Jr., whose super chats $4.99. Thank you, homeboy. Says there's an idea of a frankly some kind of abstract. There's an idea of an abstraction, but there's no real, only an entity, something illusory. Yeah, from there's an idea of a Patrick Bateman, something illusory, but this is only an abstraction. I simply am not there. Right. Thank you, David Franco. Appreciate that, homeboy. Page 144. The worship of the senses has often and with much justice been decried. Men feeling a natural instinct of terror about passions and sensations that seem stronger than themselves, and that they are conscious of sharing with the less highly organized forms of existence. But it appeared to Dorian Gray that the true nature of the senses had never been understood, and that they had remained savage and animal merely because the world had sought to starve them into submission or to kill them by pain, instead of aiming at making them elements of a new spirituality, of which a fine instinct for beauty was to be the dominant characteristic. So what you see Dorian's error here and his logical errors, and we're going to see that probably not consciously, but that the surrealists will take a cue from this in a big way, in that the surrealists will make an enemy of anything logical, of any kind of traditional religion. They make an enemy of Christianity, and they only co-opt things that have to do with a kind of an animism, Gnosticism, any kind of heresy or outright occult magic, because they see those things as illogical. And they and the great error here, obviously, is that Dorian is questioning his soul and what he can do to satiate his soul, but then he basically says, no, our soul has never been understood, so one must make a beast of himself in order to get rid of the pain of being a man, right? Says Dr. Johnson and Hunter S. Thompson. And so he becomes more beast-like. So this is often what happens. We saw this in, what was it? Oh, it was in Machiavelli. I just remembered. It was in the Machiavelli analysis we did, where we were talking about the prince, and Machiavelli says the thing about if the prince, which is essentially what Dorian Gray is here, the prince, if he has a choice between admiration and love versus terror, he would choose terror, because to terrorize the populace, right, or to terrorize oneself, one has something that they fear, which is, this is a satanic way of thinking. And that's what Dorian sort of falls into here, which is that instead of taking the hard and difficult way where one would be blessed with, seeking salvation, right, through God, instead, he seeks to satiate his senses with sin and lust and degradation, because he can feel, right? Because it's an immediate feel. It's an immediate quenching of his bloodlust. Veil after veil of thin, dusky gauze is lifted, and by degrees the forms and colors of things are restored to them, and we watch the dawn remaking the world in its antique pattern. The wan mirrors get back their mimic life, piercing the veil. Which is, I said in my note that I wrote while I was reading it, I said Epicureanism and empiricism are essentially the science. They're kind of a pre-scientistic, anti-faith that's being predicted in this book. And again, that's not to say that that's what Oscar Wilde is. It's what Dorian is in the book. That's what he worships at the altar of. It was the creation of such worlds as these that seemed to Dorian Gray to be the true object or among the true objects. He even talks about religion and communion and how he goes to church and tries to understand, if one can do that illogically, like for him, through his like feelings, but I guess to take in the mystery of the church rituals. But he stops because he says he never fell into the error of arresting his intellectual development by any formal acceptance of creed or system of mistaking for a house in which to live, an inn that is but suitable for the sojourn of a night, or for a few hours of a night in which there are no stars and the moon is in travail. Mysticism, with its marvelous power of making common things strange to us, and the subtle antinomianism that always seems to accompany it, moved him for a season. And for a season, he inclined to the materialistic doctrines of Darwinismus movement in Germany, and found a curious pleasure in tracing the thoughts and passions of men to some pearly cell in the brain. So in other words, he absorbs himself into psychology and Darwinism and a social Darwinism because he sees that's where his animalistic home is. He finds a scientific spirit in that, if irony of terms there. But this is also a great satirical play on a satirical take on the way that the intellectual classes often find that anything having to do with organized religion, right, is for them is beneath them, because they think that the pursuits of the intellect and psychology and the brain are much more apropos, when in fact they've violated their own rules of logic, right? I can't even read my note here because it's garbled. Let's see. He starts buying art, and so he starts buying art and the trappings of art, right? And what'd you say, Langley in Hampton? I shouldn't be reading the chat. At Jethro, shouts out to Jethro out there. Langley in Hampton, Virginia. Langley is in Langley, Virginia. Sorry, I shouldn't be dropping in. You guys are probably talking about something else. So then he starts to, and shouts out to Toledo here, because yes, John B. Norm Macdonald's take on Germany is the best. That little country called, people are afraid of, North Korea, that small little country over there in the middle of, on the other side of the world. They're afraid of that, when in fact they should be afraid of the country of Germany, because I don't remember if you guys have any grasp of history at all, but they declared they had a war on the world, right? And they almost won. And then a few years later, they really almost won, right? They had that guy Crankly. He's not even going to dignify his name by saying it. So Dorian starts to find his heroes, and his heroes are people like, he says, Pietro Riario, the young Cardinal Archbishop of Florence, child and minion of Sixtus IV, and whose beauty was equaled only by his debauchery, and who received Leonora of Aragon in a pavilion of white and crimson silk, filled with nymphs and centaurs, and gilded a boy that he might serve at the feast of Ganymede. He mentions Gilles de Rais here, so shouts out to Toledo, who just mentioned Gilles de Rais. Gilles de Rais, the Spider King Satanist, serial killer of France. He says he had a passion for red blood, as other men have for red wine, the son of the fiend, as was reported, and one who had cheated his father at dice when gambling with him for his own soul. Giambista Sibo, who in mockery took the name of the innocent, and into whose torpid veins the blood of 3 lads was infused by. Oh, so he's talking. I forgot about this part. So he's talking here about a transhumanist who wants to live forever by taking the blood of certain people. He talks about Sigismundo Malatesta, Lord of Rimini. He mentions Tiberius. Remember, in this, we did a stream on the 12 Caesars and the lives of the Caesars, and Tacitus, right, and Suetonius, and talking about how Tiberius had his grotto at Capri, and he had his little minnows swim around and nibble at him, right? And then, of course, Caligula. Tell him, okay. Shouts out to OK out there. And let's see. So later on, page 170, Dorian kills the artist. The guy says it's never too late. Let us kneel down and try if we cannot remember a prayer. Isn't there a verse somewhere? Though your sins be as scarlet, yet I will make them as white as snow. And Dorian says those words mean nothing to him now. And then he kills the guy who confronts him, and he stabs him right behind the ear. And he has a feeling of loathing for Basil Hallward, the artist, that had made him kill him as he sat in the chair, came back to him, and he grew cold with passion. The dead man was still sitting there, too, and in the sunlight. Now, it's interesting that he's in the sunlight, and that, hey, sis, what's up? What's up to my sister out there? So then what does he do? He dives into, on page 175, it was a thing to be driven out of the mind, to be drugged with poppies, to be strangled, lest it might strangle oneself. And he's horrified by human faces, but he's obsessed with his own face. He dives into opium. Then he goes to Venice. Again, he dives into, after he gets the guy Allen to help him dispose of the body of the guy that he killed that's decomposing, he goes to Venice, and then he comes back, and the terror of the British mind, which I was just mentioning with Machiavelli on page 192. Dorian Gray changed his seat and went and sat by Lord Henry. The word doctrinaire, a word full of terror to the British mind, reappeared from time to time between these explosions. An alliterative prefix served as an ornament of oratory. And then he, let's see, dives into opium again on page 195. He says, it was a small Chinese box of black and gold dust lacquer, elaborately wrought, the sides patterned with curved waves, and the silken cords hung with round crystals and tasseled in plated metal threads. He opened it. Inside was a green paste, waxy in luster, the odor curiously heavy and persistent. So then he starts frequenting the opium dens more often. Chapter 16, he had often tried it and would try it again now. There were opium dens where one would buy oblivion, dens of horror where the memory of old sins could be destroyed by the madness of sins that were new. A good image of that would be in the From Hell analysis that we did. And remember we were talking about Jack the Ripper back in September. Page 197, the hideous hunger for opium began to gnaw at him. So now he gets enslaved to his addiction. Page 199, some Malays were crouching by a little charcoal stove, playing with bone counters and showing their white teeth as they chatted. As Dorian hurried up its 3 rickety steps, the heavy odor of opium met him. He heaved a deep breath and his nostrils quivered with pleasure. When he entered, a young man with smooth yellow hair who was bending over a lamp, lighting a long, thin pipe, looked at him and nodded in a hesitating manner. As long as one has this stuff, one doesn't want friends. I think I have had too many friends. So at this point, at least he's, I say at least he's diving into an external addiction rather than the addiction to blood and himself, right? And page 201, there are moments, sorry, y'all blowing up here. There you go. There are moments, psychologists tell us, when the passion for sin, or for what the world calls sin, so dominates a nature that every fiber of the body, as every cell of the brain, seems to be instinct with fearful impulses. Men and women at such moments lose the freedom of their will. They move to their terrible end as automatons move. Choice is taken from them, and conscience is either killed, or if it lives at all, lives but to give rebellion its fascination and disobedience its charm. I bet a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born. All sins, as theologians weary not of reminding us, are sins of disobedience. When that high spirit, that morning star of evil, fell from heaven, it was as a rebel that he fell. And that is Dorian Gray. So at the end, the elder man, Henry, tells him the only horrible thing in the world is ennui. And then eventually he confronts himself, and he destroys himself through destroying his mirror image, which is his kind of dissociated spirit. I mean, at once, this is a story of Gnosticism, DID in the Robert Louis Stevenson Jekyll and Hyde sense. We've done Jekyll and Hyde. We've done The Bottle Imp. We've done Robert Louis Stevenson. It's funny how all of the books that we read sort of serve as prerequisites for the next one. And then in the end, he destroys himself and he is left a shriveled up corpse of nothing, because that's what he was on the inside. So that is The Picture of Dorian Gray. I recommend this. I mean, I'm sure people have read it. You know, you might have read it in your youth, but again, you can tear through this in a few hours, and it's a great classic book, and it's one of those books again that I think truly is a cornerstone of not only the canon, but it is a predictive book for modern literature, for modern art, and for especially for the way that culture operates now in the postmodern world, post Big Nine, mid Great Reset, where, you know, that's the modus operandi of what culture, you know, top down is telling us, right? Live in the moment, live according to your senses, and feel, right? Feelings, as he says to the dude. All right, so next we've got Velvet Buzzsaw, and if you want to support me, yeah, you can hit that dono chat button there, right there, because that will get to me much easier and much quicker than the official way there. You can hit that dono chat. You can also support me via PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. Those are immediate, and those really help me out. I could use your support. Thank you so much for being here. So next we're going to do Velvet Buzzsaw, and then we've got of course Coteasy and Chase are going to be talking about art after this, or they'll go sometime, and then we've got we're going to be watching JD later. So thank you for dropping those links. Thanks to the mods out there and all my friends. Thanks for being here. So let's dive into Velvet Buzzsaw. So this is a fun movie. Okay. It's Dan Gilroy, Jake Gyllenhaal. I like Jake Gyllenhaal. You guys know I like Jake Gyllenhaal. I tend to have an affinity. Oh, sorry. Nope. Sorry. Didn't cut it off before. So boomer teching it here, you guys. So yes, Jake Gyllenhaal, I like him because I have an affinity for actors that are born in 1980 or 81. And this is a good film because it's a great satire on the modern art world, or the postmodern art world, but it's also fun. And I think that JD did an excellent analysis of this a long time ago. But I think it deserves to be looked at again, especially in relation to what we've just read, Dorian Gray, and our later talk about surrealism. So what the movie's about is essentially that we have we start off at Art Basel, which is the big Miami has a bunch of different things. They have the Winter Music Conference, which is great. They've got the Ultra Festival, right? Big techno festival. They've got A1A Beachfront Avenue. They've got Art Deco, but they've also got the big art exhibition that occurs every year, and it's a magnet. It's one of those global magnets for the art world. And so what we see is we start off in Miami. It's interesting because we think of this as you would think of it as being a New York centered movie because the art world is centered in New York, but this one's an LA and Miami movie. And so Morph, spelled M-O-R-F, Jake Gyllenhaal, who is great in this movie. He's like really good. He walks into the exhibition or whatever, and immediately he bypasses, we see these two yuppies arguing about how they're going to get into the exhibition. Don't you have our tickets? You have our name down. And he just walks on through, and we find out that he's an art critic. And, he's writing for Art World or Art News or whatever. And he goes in and he's met with some other art person who's talking to him about, like, did you see the exhibition? And he's like, I'm not your mouthpiece, he says. And his he's great in this movie because okay, so one thing, this is just a thing about acting and about actors. One thing that actors do in films that this separates the great actors and the theatrical actors, theater based, from film actors who are always playing themselves, is the walk, the way that a person walks. You have to get their, like, everyone has. It sounds kind of, I don't know, it sounds lame to say it's like a person's fingerprints, but everybody has a unique way of being and moving, right? And so the first thing, like, that a great actor will do is capture, like, the movements and the way that they are when they're just being. And Gyllenhaal, like, gets that in the movie because he is this guy. He walks in a kind of a, he's not like pressing down the thing, but he's like, he's walking like the New York art critic, okay, and young. So, and he's got this sort of what would you call his wardrobe? It's like Ralph Simmons with Tom Ford. He's wearing Tom Ford glasses. At times he's wearing Persols. They even mentioned those. I didn't see your chat get deleted, Toledo. Not that I'm paying attention to the chat, but anyway, so he walks in and he says, he's like looking at the various exhibitions and he sees these things that are so ridiculous. Like, he comes across Hobo Man, and Hobo Man is a robotic man who, it's actually pretty clever. And it's a lot like, what is it? Zoolander 2, right? Which is, Zoolander is set in the, the very pimps, the very crack whores that populate our city, right? And Zoolander 2 is set in the sludge of the toxic waste dump. Well, this is Hobo Man, and Hobo Man is like a robotic guy in a tattered suit. He's a robot. And he says, did you know I built the railroads? And he's got like a hobo sign. And he's looking at me. He's like, very interesting. And then he comes across some sort of Tom Vesselman looking paintings, which are just, dots and color. Damien Hirst did this, but like dots and color. And he's like, okay, whatever. And there are a couple scenes in the movie where he'll come across sort of live action set piece art that's like, it's supposed to be a take on the domesticity and the boring nature of the plebs, right? And it's like a family sitting there eating TV dinner, like on a sofa and in Lazy Boys. But the problem is, when you're watching it, you go, okay, this is obviously satirical, because this kind of art is not really even relevant anymore because it's not edgy. This is, everybody knows about this. This is like the 50s edgy art, right? Or it's like Oliver Stone does that well in Natural Born Killers, when he does the movie within the movie, and it's like a live action sitcom, and it's got Rodney, and that's where Juliette Lewis escapes from, right? And, Woody Harrelson has to go in and help her escape in a kind of a Sonic Youth moment where they have to off the family or whatever. Remember the cover of the Sonic Youth album, which is itself supposed to be a Roy Lichtenstein. Like, it's a I don't know if it is a Roy Lichtenstein, but it's a cartoon image of like a 50s kind of comic book, and it's two people with shades on and sort of wigs, almost like Myra Hindley and what's his face. We grabbed the car. They killed their parents and then they took off. Well, Oliver Stone does that well in the movie because it's also supposed to be like a meta statement on within the movie. But when Morph sees these things, he's like, this is too much. So then he comes across a sphere, and he says, what is this? Because the sphere, as Rene Russo, is my cotton picking land. Rene Russo. Remember that in Family Guy? Rene Russo is like 107, according to Family Guy. Anyway, so she's like, yes, it's imbued with frequencies and some sort of gizmos, and anybody who puts their hand into the sphere gets a personalized feeling that is supposed to speak to their psyche. So it's some sort of, magnetic sphere or whatever. And it reminded me of, um, I'll show you guys what it reminded me of. It reminded me of, there is a sphere, and there's a series of famous spheres. Let's go back to here. And there's one near me. You would think it would be a black cube, but it's not. I'll show you right here. So this is a series of spheres. Not this one, not the top left, because that's a movable sphere. This is a sphere that looks like the Death Star. And there's one near me at the Virginia Museum. I mean, doesn't it look like a Death Star? But that's what the sphere kind of looks like in the film. And there's one, I forget who the artist is. He's a Portuguese artist, but there's one at the United Nations. There's one at the Vatican. There's one at the Virginia Museum. There's one in Berkeley. And it's just this gold sphere. The one in this one is, let's see. It's similar to that, but it's not gold. It's a mirrored, metallic aluminium sphere. This is a cool shot because it's like got this kind of gold. It's got a white halo beneath it, right? Which is reflecting. So what the sphere does is it reflects the person looking at it, right? And it's spheroid, but it also looks like something otherworldly or alien. And maybe it represents the Arduino, like in the film, like in the show Westworld, right? Remember in Westworld season 2, they finally come to, let me see if I can show you that. Westworld. It's like, there it is. It's the same thing, right? So that is supposed to be, oh, no, that is supposed to be their human consciousness that is, that is uploaded. All the elites upload their consciousness into this spheroid ball, which is supposed to be like the Arduino center, right? The pineal center. And then that allows them to live forever by going into the robotic bodies of the people. Well, that's kind of like the same in this in Velvet Buzzsaw, is what I got from it. I'm not saying that the two are the same, that they consciously thought of that. Another thing that's funny is that the intro music to this is from John Cale, Velvet Underground, John Cale. And it sounds exactly like the intro music to American Psycho. Bum 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 bum. Remember at the beginning of American Psycho when they're like, it's showing the artistry of like the restaurant industry in New York in the 80s and all the minimalist style of food. There's like barely any food on the plate and all the drizzle is going on it. And the drizzle is supposed to look like blood. Well, it's like the same intro song in this, but it's John Cale. Or maybe it's John Cale. It's John Cale in American Psycho. In this, it is, I forget the name of the musician, but it's like the same song. Anyway, so what happens is they come to this spheroid ball and like people stick their hands in and stuff. But that halo right there is interesting because it's like an inverted halo. So it's like it's on the bottom, right? Rather than it's like the world's been inverted and we see our image in this warped view. So Morph loves this. He's like, what is this? And he wants to purchase it. Well, there's also there's a girl in this who is supposed to be the assistant to Rene Russo. Get off my cotton picking land. And she's like, look, you don't know shit. And then she goes home and and she finds a dead body in her apartment building, and she hears a cat. So the cat is obviously supposed to be like the familiar spirit of this magic man artist that she doesn't know about yet. But she reports the body, and the next day when she gets to work, she's like, "I'm late because I found a dead man." And Rene Russo's like, "Yes, well, this happened to me once, and you expect me to believe?" Like human life you see in this movie, like the way that the plebs live is just not important to them at all. It just does not exist. And finding the body of a person like is a reason for her to be fired, right? But so she puts her on, she says, "No more, you have no more contact with people up front." And then she goes home and she finds that they're going to liquidate the apartment and they're going to throw everything away. Well, she goes upstairs and she grabs all of the art, and then she says, I'm the dealer, right? Because when the next day she shows it to Jake Gyllenhaal and he says, "What is this? This is wonderful." And so the way that all of the art appears in this is very Francis Bacon, Gerhard Richter. And what that means is that there's a thing about sort of mid 20th century to late 20th century art, which we see this all, you hear about this on the Boomer News, right? You know, the artists wanted to do these terrible things and they painted in blood. And of course, Marinka did this like literally, right? With, you know, the whole, what is it? Eat the Pain and all that, you know, and all the Creeper Al Crowley stuff. Well, the Francis Bacon stuff is supposed to be basically, it's like, it looks like the artist, and again, I don't want to say that the artist did this. The artist did paint it in blood, but what we're supposed to see is that the canvas is supposed to be the life itself, that the artist is completely absorbed into the life of the canvas, and that there's just nothing. It's all chaos and nothingness. And that is obviously as a result of more than just the trauma of modernity, right? It's too late for it to be something resulting from World War I, like the Surrealists do. It's more a result of like, you can now press a button and everything gets eviscerated in 1 second, and it happened twice, right? With the A bomb and then the hydrogen bomb, and then so that informs post-modernity in the sense that you live in a kind of nuclear winter, according to these people, right? And that there's no meaning. It's the broken, fragmented landscape of literature in Don DeLeo and Cormac McCarthy, and they're still searching for meaning, but for this art, it's like their meaning is total chaos, right? And so that takes on an occult significance because it looks demonic. It looks like a demon inhabiting a person screaming to get out in pain. And that's what she sells. So all of it is like very rusty looking. It's very like, you know, blood rust. And so then there's like a bidding war over the art. And what happens is people start to get literally haunted by the art itself, because we see like these little like electrical lightning strikes fragment the lines in the painting, and they start opening up, and you kind of expect the painting to come alive like Vigo in Ghostbusters 2, but that's different. That's like the artist is now living in his art and he has to escape. In this, what happens is the artist has died, but whatever spirit was inhabiting him is alive in the artwork. And so it feeds on the feeding frenzy of the art world, right? And even the assistant. So another thing that's good in this is that there's always an assistant. And there's always an assistant, and then there's the guy who hangs the canvas. And at one point, she says, "Listen, I'm not going to take any advice from the guy hanging the canvases." Okay. And that occurs in the movie Basquiat because Willem Dafoe basically has the same lines as this guy in the movie. He says, "You know, I'm an artist too. Yeah, I had a show, and you know, I hang these things for these people, but I had a show at the, you know, at the whatever gallery in Chelsea, and you know, I can get us in somewhere. And in that movie, Basquiat says, basically looks at Willem Dafoe's character and is like, he walks out immediately, because he sees that that's what his life is going to be if he doesn't like go all in. And this one, the guy says that to try to get a date with the girl, and then she says like to lock up the canvases or whatever. He puts them in the truck. This is a young guy. He drives off, and he stops at a gas station that has the words humble in neon lights, and then it goes out when he's dead. But he walks inside, and he gets, I forget how he dies, but it comes alive. And later on, the Tom Sturridge, who plays the South African art dealer, who he's also really good in this. He finds him. So he goes in and he has these paintings in a room, and he finds that the door locks, and then it becomes warped. And it's weird because it looks like I'm trying to think of what painting does that. It's not Dali. It's more recent than that. But the walls and the ceiling of the artwork sort of warp in, like he's in the painting, and then a film starts projecting on the wall. So we have multimedia, and then he tries to pull the electricity. That doesn't work. It's still projecting. So it's a projection of this demon, projecting this demonic spirit through film on the wall. He goes to inspect it. He looks up, and a hand, this is really weird. This is like Masonic. A hand grabs him from above, pulls his tie, and then hangs him. Right. So he's hanged in this room. So he's dead. You can guess probably what's going to happen to Rene Russo, because she's like she has something on her that's a Chekhov's gun. So it's called Velvet Buzzsaw because Rene Russo was in the movie was in a punk 70s 80s punk post-punk group in New York. And then she says, and then I decided to, you know, imbue my life with meaning in the art world or whatever. But what she really does is sell out to the like hyper consumerist, hyper capitalist a laundering system of the art world. So now she's an art dealer, but she still has a Velvet Buzzsaw tattoo on her neck because that was the name of her group. And so this is a nod to the Velvet Underground with John Cale. And also, it's a nod to, I guess, Basquiat, because Basquiat was in a group called Gray that played at the Mud Club in the early 80s in the East Village in New York. And they basically play, you know, who was in that group was Vincent Gallo. Vincent Gallo was in Jean-Michel Basquiat's band. And the band is essentially like, they were doing samples of television commercials and like hotline call-ins, and then putting it over a kind of a freeform jazz mixed with like low budget synths, which sounds like very uber cool for, you know, early 80s, but it's like basically just like listening to trash sludge. So that's where Velvet Buzzsaw comes from. Remember Velvet Revolver? Remember that band with Scott Weiland and Duff McKagan and Slash? And there were two other dudes. It was Stone Temple Pilots and Guns N' Roses in the mid 2000s? They weren't bad. I mean, I love Scott Weiland. So anyway, that's Chekhov's gun, right? Because we know that the paintings will animate something that they touch, right? Or that they are in the same they're in the same atmosphere, and that they will come alive, the mode of death, and that's what's going to happen to her. Well, anyway, Morph goes off, and he takes a trip with the girl, and they go to like some club or whatever, and then they end up sleeping with each other. But then we see that he is Skittles, because the next well, we knew that from the very beginning, but the next scene is him like sitting in this like LA, you know, there's like floor to ceiling glass, and his Skittles person is there, and he's like writing art reviews on his MacBook naked, being a pervert. But but he's transfixed by this girl, and the reason he is because she is in possession of the art. So he is in love. He's in love or in lust with the physical art itself and anything having to do with it. All the people are sort of ancillary, right? And which ties into Dorian Gray. And what else happens? Let's see. There's the bidding war. There's the guy in the collective. So there's an up and coming artist at the beginning who is like this cool looking dude. He looks kind of like The Weeknd, but he's the up and coming artist, and they offer him a spot. Well, then, and he's in an art collective. He's a young guy. He's kind of like Dash Snow or something. You guys ever heard of Dash Snow? Dash Snow was one of these guys who was like a graffiti artist, skateboard punk, heroin addict artist, and he was the son of like some executive, but he lived in New York, and he lived in Soho. He died young, and that's what this guy kind of reminds me of, what his character is supposed to be, that kind of archetype. And so then the guy who is the head of the art collective comes to visit Rene Russo, and he's like this like buff looking Indian dude or whatever, and he's like, I came to talk to you about the collective, right? I'm the head of the collective. And she's like, you're a head of a collective? That doesn't make sense. Of course it's a collective. So that's, again, it's a satire because of the prevalence of art collectives, which have kind of died down now, but they, especially when the film was made just a few years ago and in the 2000s, that was a huge thing, right? So he says, back off. And she says, back off, and she's a busy businesswoman. So she backs him off. But then later he will come back because the girl I'm sorry if this is confusing, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. The girl who is in possession of the Dietz art is in a bar, and he says, look, you know what? Because they've been sleeping together. And he says, you know what? We're done. I can't take this hyper art anymore. It's too capitalist, man. And she says, you are on the verge of breaking globally. Do you understand what that means? We've already set a date, right? And he says, he like kisses her on the head, which is a weird, it's like he's offering her a kind of artistic absolution in that sense. And then he walks off. Well, good for him, because he's going to live. He's not going to have any part in this bullshit. Right. She leaves. She's got her car blocked in by probably the art collective dudes, Mustang or, Suicide Door Chevy or whatever it is. And Morph starts to see the paintings morph. They start to animate. He goes to the eye doctor and he says, oh, there's a scene that made me like actually angry, because he goes to the eye doctor and he says, I think I've got Guillaume disease or whatever, because my eyes are not, I'm seeing images and I'm hallucinating and I'm not doing anything that would cause that. And the doctor says, oh, I see, you've been on the internet, right? And it's like, yes, motherfucker, like that's where you're going to go to look up what I have, right? So excuse my language. But anyway, he finds that it's not his eyes. It's not his. So what that's supposed to be is that, number one, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? On a basic level. Two, that his eyes are playing tricks on him. Three, that the illuminate confirm eye. Four, that it's not his physical body and its processes and its biological complexity that's causing this. It's something beyond him, and that is external. And that is that the art will come alive. So he gets all of the paintings and he says, put them in storage. And he gets his assistant, put them in storage. He goes to the storage unit, and then he's haunted by, guess whom? Hobo Man. Hobo Man comes after him and kills him. So he's confronted by Hobo Man and he dies. And then we see Rene Russo back up at her postmodernistic bullshit Arizona, minimalist style house with glass overlooking the valley or whatever. And she's got her rocks and her transcendentalist stones and her meditation garden, and she's up there with the pool mirroring her, right? So we see sort of two worlds. And she says to the guy, "Did you get everything out?" And he says, "Yes, we itemized everything. We got it out. We got it all out." So she gets rid of all of the deets art. But it is not done with her because a shorn cat walks up to her, and then her velvet buzzsaw tattoo on the back of her neck comes alive and drills a hole into her neck. We don't really see it, but she gets decapitated. So what that's supposed to be is that the head of all of this has lost her head, right? She's lost just like everybody lost their head over the Dietz art. And they had this shark feeding frenzy. Now she has lost her head, and the head of all of the commerce has also lost its head, right? So it's back down to a sort of I guess a collective level in a sense. And it's a shorn cat because there are two cats. There's one cat that is the Dietz cat that is taken away by Natalia Dreyer. Natalia Dreyer. It's Natalia Dyer. I said, we got Natalia Dreyer here. And she gets, she's in Stranger Things. And she's the assistant who gets the job from Morph, but then she decides to leave. She's going to go back to Wisconsin or whatever, but she takes the cat. But she's innocent. She's not really involved in any of this. So what the art does is it plays on the sins of the beholder. At one point, somebody goes back to the sphere and they put their hand in the sphere, and it mirrors their own psyche, and it saws off it takes their arm. So it takes a limb. It's almost like it takes a blood sacrifice from the person willing to do anything to get this art. And the art itself, the Dietz art, has been imbued with the kind of magical spirit of this like sacrifice, if that makes sense. So the end of the film is we see her driving off, and we see a hobo man with a shopping cart, and he's now got the art. He's got one of the Dietz paintings. He puts it up on a fence, and these two yuppies, remember we had the yuppies at the beginning who were trying to get in. It's not the same yuppies, but two yuppies walking by, and they say, "Oh, that's fascinating." You see art that's being sold on fences, kind of like we talked about Midnight in Paris with the art that's sold in the stalls along the Seine. But you see this in New York and in LA, and they buy it. He says, "I don't know, $5." So he sells them. He sells the artwork. So we assume it's going to go on from there, right? It's about obsession and power. And of course, yes, it's about power and the abuse of power. Well, it is certainly. But it's also about how power through art. The art is almost just a symbol of, yes, it's a symbol of hyper consumerism, and it's a symbol of, the money making abuses of the power structure, but it's more than that. It's about how art is currency to the kind of pyramid structure, and it doesn't really matter the content. In fact, the content can be fake. The fake art is often trafficked. It can be something that is the hot ticket at the moment that just happens to be, like with Basquiat. It can be Picasso. It can be classical art, or it can be something that is political. So, for example, let's see. Do you know what is the highest selling artwork in the world? It is, I'm going to show it to you right here. Let's go. Not that one. Not that one. Let's go back. It's not that. Hold on. I'm getting there. I'm going to look at it for you right here. Highest selling painting, and it's from Dubai. Yeah, here it is. Okay. And it was sold during the Karanka. And it is huge. This is it right here. It's sold at the Dubai auction. Look how big this painting is. That's it. $62 million. Dubai-based painter sells artwork for $62 million. Now, that artist, let's see, says, yes, Sasha Jaffrey. Sasha Jaffrey went to Eton and I think Oxford, so he's part of the structure as well, right? He's part of the Old Boy Network. It says at 17,000 square feet, Sasha Jaffrey's The Journey of Humanity, an abstraction featuring drips, whirls, and splatters of various hues, is the world's largest selling painting, as certified by Guinness Book of World Records. On Tuesday, The Journey of Humanity sold for $62 million at an auction held at Atlantis, the Palm Hotel. Let's see. Says Jaffrey, who has not previously had a major presence at auction, painted The Journey of Humanity over the course of several months last year at the Atlantis during Karanka. The resulting canvas includes more than 300 layers of paint and is the size of 2 football fields. He has previously sold his art to benefit charitable organizations with actress Eva Longoria, musician Paul McCartney, and the former president Barack Obama reportedly among his buyers. So, and you see in the painting, you see like hearts and hearts made of kind of flowers. It looks like a brain. This is basically one giant sort of Jackson Pollock-esque abstract expressionist painting that is the absolute chaos but interconnectedness of a globalist world. Right? You see how everything's interconnected there? How the lines are all interconnected. We have the palette, we have like a sort of a vivid palette of color, but it gets lost in the kind of, I don't know, what would you call that? It's like in Dorian Gray, how it's rusted. It almost looks rusted over, like it's muted. It's mute color. And what I would say is that is a perfect expression of the way that the globus world sees humanity. It's called an expression of humanity. It's supposed to be about humanity, is that it's all just junk and interconnected and mixed up, and that the artist literally has to walk over his own art in order to paint it. Right. And think about the fact that remember the dude throwing the shoes at W, and how the feet are a symbol in that particular part of the world of disrespect, right? And that's exactly where the guy sold the painting and where he is and what he's doing to the painting. Also, that he is Western educated, he's elite educated, went to Eton, and I think it's Eton and Oxford, and sells the painting for because the soles of his feet, but sells the painting for this amount of money that is clearly like, it's just digits at that point. It's just digits. And it's either, it's like, look at it. It's circuitous. It's like the very method of the trafficking itself of all of the things involved in that, and the way that these things are laundered. Right? What is this? It's over sense. It's completely overwhelming the senses, but there's nothing there. Right? Which is what they would see, I guess. I guess that's what it's supposed to be. I'm sure they look at it and say, oh, it's color. Right? And it's about how, it's colorized and it's beautiful and it's hearts and it's about how the world is one. Right? That's not what I see at all. I see like a degradation of those things. Anyway, so that's the highest selling painting. And so anyway, so that is what happens in Velvet Buzzsaw. And while we have a little bit of time, should I tell you a little bit about surrealist art? I mean, not tell you about it. I'm sure you guys know about it, but I reread this excellent book on surrealism that I got. It's by Patrick Waldberg, and I read this in May 1999, and then I just reread it again today. But it's interesting because it's basically all about surrealism and what surrealism is and the manifesto of surrealism. And I think that that's an interesting art epic to dive into because, number one, surrealism begins as a kind of anti-commercial movement that kind of almost self-consciously becomes commercialized. And then it's been 100 years and it's still, I think probably the average person hears the word surrealism or to talk about surrealism and thinks like, oh, this is edgy art. This is modern art. And it is modern art. Well, because it comes out of in Midnight. Okay, so in Midnight in Paris, we talked about how he goes back to the 20s, and then he goes back to the Belle Epoque, right? And Henry Miller, right, is writing in the 1930s in Paris, and that's kind of a segue between the post-World War I era and World War II, and then the end of World War II with the A-bomb is what gives us postmodernism. Also, the 30s in Germany. I mean, the 30s in Europe is a monumental time. But for a long time between the Franco-Prussian War and World War I, you have this kind of a peacetime. You have a Pax, not a Pax Britannica, but there's I guess it's a Pax Americana. I guess it's it's just a lull. But there's a great, there's a lot of art being produced. But then the suffering of World War I gives us the great trauma that leads to modern literature. And of course, the Surrealist movement. And the Surrealist movement is like really revolutionary in terms of art, in terms of the visual arts, because all art, we've talked about how all artwork is, and all artistic periods are kind of reactionary against the previous art, right? Every generation has a kind of reaction against the previous generation. So the hippies have a reaction to the order and the stability of the 50s lead on to a reaction against such, which is the kind of chaos of the 60s, right? Well, just as that happened, like with the kind of order and stability of pre-World War I Europe, and then we have the great trauma of World War I and everything that it results in. Well, the Surrealist movement is a kind of a side branch of where visual art goes. And what they decided to do was basically have a complete rejection of everything that had existed before. So anything dealing with logic or order or religion-based art or anything like that, they throw away. And that's why surrealists eventually become interested in things like animistic art, voodoo art, Peruvian and Tibetan art, and that eventually gets co-opted into into a globalist system and a globalist art market. But the French art, the French surrealist movement is really revolutionary in that it is still relevant in terms of this is what they said is exactly the way that things are now on a widespread scale. So for instance, he says, this guy, Patrick Waldberg, who's excellent, says, let's see. It has been said that there's no surrealist art, and this is true. That's interesting, right? Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. So it's very, Al Crowley wrote Diary of a Drug Fiend at the same time that the surrealists were active in continental Europe. And there is a clear connection between even Al Crowley's own art at Cefalù in Sicily, or his occult art or his literature with the surrealists. I would be surprised to find out that they did not know of each other. I'm sure he knew of them, because it's weird that they are in the same place at the same time, and that the same sort of zeitgeist is occurring. the spirit of the age. It's been said that there's no surrealist art, Rabelais, and this is true. Surrealism, originally elaborated by poets, can be defined not as a matter of aesthetics, but as a way of knowing and a kind of ethics, which is interesting because it's anti-ethical. To change life, according to Rimbaud, was the prime concern. So it's interesting also that the surrealists take, Rimbaud is mentioned, through this constantly, and they clearly took a lot of inspiration from Rimbaud's Illuminations and A Season in Hell, and his effects on the French symbolists and Mallarmé and Nerval. And they take that and run with it because Rimbaud had this phrase about one must be absolutely modern, but you have to look at the context of that in his journey through hell. However, a number of artists who were in agreement with the poets associated themselves with the Surrealist movement and endeavored to put its various methods of expression into practice. Recourse to the imaginary, to dreams, and to the unconscious, and to chance stimulated and inspired a number of important painters, those at the heart of the movement as well as those outside it, to such an extent that it is not incorrect today to speak of a surrealist painting or art, always bearing in mind that it is not a question of a school or a formal movement, but of a spiritual orientation. Do you get it? JD has mentioned this constantly, not constantly, but he's mentioned this frequently in the last couple years, especially recently, talking about surrealist art and how it is spiritual in nature. It's occultic in nature. So he was right on with that. In fact, when the works of various surrealists are assembled, what is striking is not their family resemblance, as in the case of the Cubists, the Faubes, or the Tacists. It is above all their difference. In other words, there's unity and variety even within the surrealist movement. It is difficult to demarcate surrealism and art, but we can, broadly speaking, discern two great tendencies, which are quite dissimilar with regard to their plastic results. So remember, in the Picture of Dorian Gray, I was constantly mentioning like the fact that he's plasticine, right? And he has sort of a plastic animism of a soulless painting. There is, on the one hand, the class of painters for whom calligraphy, animation, and movement are the essentials, regardless of the subject represented. So it's also, I love it how Ezra Pound exists in the same time frame and is he's not self-consciously not a surrealist because he's above surrealism, but he is not a surrealist in any way. And that the emphasis on imagism and imagery really goes in two separate directions. If you want a super chat, please, I would really appreciate if you could support me with PayPal, Cash App, or Venmo. I really need the support. I could use the support. If you are enjoying this talk on surrealism, Velvet Buzzsaw, and the Picture of Dorian Gray, I could really, really use your support. I know it's March and we're almost into May. We're getting into spring, but I really could use it. I really would appreciate it. And also big time shouts out to Jason out there who supported me recently, dropped me $15 the other day. Really, really appreciate that. Shouts out to Rachel who says, check your PayPal, homeboy. So I'm going to check that. Shouts out to Rachel at Based Homeschool Mom, who did an awesome talk. And also, Rachel, I got to say, I loved your talk with Courtney Turner the other day. And you guys at one point were mentioning the prevalence of narcotic substances and how they were disseminated and used, especially within military circles, and especially that country in the middle of Europe in the mid 20th century. I've got two great books on that. One is called Blitzed, and the other one is I forget what the other one's called, but there's a couple of great books on that. Also, the book Whiteout discusses that, and also Alfred McCoy discusses it, and the book Hepcats, Narcs, and Pipe Dreams discusses it. So that was really good. I really like that. I really like what you guys were discussing. And let's see, Rachel sends $10 via PayPal. Thank you so much, Rachel. Really appreciate you so much. Thank you. Shouts out to you and the Crucible and to your channel, Based Homeschool Mom. Shouts out to Maddie at Digital Minefield, who sent $4 on Cash App for the Red Bull and Sticky Note Fund. Thank you so much. Actually, it's funny you say that because I've run out of sticky notes. I go through a pen about every 2 days. So my pens and my sticky notes are getting low. My books are getting low. Shouts out to Kira, who recently, by the way, last week, I gave her a shout out before. I want to give her another shout out. Donated $40 and said thank you for all the streams and all that you do. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Shouts out to the real John Connor, who donated $20 last time. Thank you so much. And again, shouts out to Jason, shouts out to Genghis, and everybody who has supported me. Shouts out to Toledo. Yes, again, please think about supporting me out there, you guys. I really could use it. So, if you have the time or the inclination, or you want to, or you want to share the stream, I really appreciate that. So this says, let's see, Max Ernst, Andre Masson, Miro. I have a Miro. A small Miro painting here. It's an original. I don't know when I got that, but I know when I got it, but anyway, I have a Miro here, Juan Miro. Mata, I saw Miro, big Miro paintings when I was in Portugal, and I'm lucky to have seen a bunch of these artists in person. I've seen Picasso, Dali. On the other hand, it says there are descriptives who were inspired by Chirico. Among them, we find Rene Magritte, Salvador Dali, Paul Delvaux, Toyin, and others. With the former, the idea is simply suggested without concern for exact representation. With the latter, the scene is unreal, but the setting, the objects, and the human figures which comprise it are painted with fidelity. For the sake of convenience, we could designate the first group by the name emblematics, while the second would be the naturalists of the imaginary. These distinctions are obviously not absolute. Certain artists waver between two poles, either by resorting to archetypes, to the traditional signs of magic, Victor Brauner and Kurt Seligman, or by seeking an ambiguous fantasy in which the definiteness of the subject alternates with a deliberate vagueness. Others finally have passed from a scrupulous realism to a fuse in space in which the significant forms are no more than indicated. Okay, now it talks about automatism. Automatism is in literature is automatic writing, and that Hemingway talks about that in A Movable Feast, and of course James Joyce is known for automatic writing, and Ezra Pound. Automatic writing works like this, if you don't know. So automatic writing, just on the surface, is this, and this is a useful exercise in terms of if you are a writer, or you have to write something for an academic setting, and you can't get the juices flowing, so to speak. Think of, this is what you would do. You would think of your topic, and you would give yourself, let's say, a time. You would set it's easier to start with like a short time and then kind of go longer. So you could start with 30 seconds and then go to a minute and then go to 5 minutes. And you think of your topic. Let's say you're writing about the Battle of Waterloo, and you would just write. Okay, and you would just write. You write, and what you do is, if you're you can type it too, but you type without stopping. You don't, if you're writing, you don't take a break because your hand gets tired or you have to think. There's no thinking involved. It's all from what you already know. So, for instance, if I was speaking it, I would say something like, I don't know, the Battle of Waterloo takes place with the Duke of Wellington and Napoleon Bonaparte. This exists in Europe. This is the death knell for the Napoleonic Empire and the Continental Army in Europe. I was recently watching Patton, where he was talking about the Napoleonic Empire and how he said that he had seen the battle because he witnessed the pain and suffering that occurred when they were trying to get out of Moscow on the retreat, and he knew that it was the sign of the end of the war because he saw hand carts and carts pulled by horses instead of things pulled by mechanisms and engineering. And Duke of Wellington had a great quote that's really pretty funny. He has a number of maxims, but he said that one time when he witnessed the head of the Portuguese military, he was trying to give an inspirational speech to his soldiers, and the guy said, "Remember, men, you are Portuguese." And he thought that was hilarious, because who would use that in inspirational speech? It's not like in Braveheart, right? Or in Henry V, right? When, we marry few, we band of brothers. So that's the death knell. And then also at the same time, it's interesting because you have Lord Nelson, and there's Lord Nelson's the Tower in Trafalgar. So that's automatic writing. Now, most of that is just junk, right? But the purpose is that you've gotten your mental processes going in your writing. Okay. Now that has no harm. There's nothing wrong with doing that, because in a sense, writing in any way is automatic in that sense. Automatism is when the person does this for an extended period of time, and it becomes almost like a cut-up method with William Burroughs, or like a Joycean stream of consciousness, right? Where, remember the Norm Macdonald bit where the lady was interviewing him, and she said, "What is this? Is this what you do? Like, is this what you do in your comedic routine? Just this stream of consciousness?" And he goes, "Why do you keep saying stream of consciousness?" And then later, she brings it up again. "Is this what you're going to do at Zanies? You're going to do a stream of consciousness?" And he says, what do you keep saying stream of consciousness? It's called conversation. So in a sense, stream of consciousness is just conversation. But when imbued with an occult spirit, or where one feels like one is writing and is leaving one's mind and soul empty for some other spirit to inhabit it, it becomes automatism. It's almost like a medium writing, so that you are seeking inspiration from now look, seeking inspiration from the muse is what all artists do, right? Now, literally in Greek, that would be like the muse is a goddess who comes and whispers in your ear. So it has a religious overtone in that sense, right? And with these guys, with the Surrealists, they consciously take on an occult mode and medium of this, because they say they want to do away with the strictures of religion and order and logic, and they want to introduce chaos and a chaotic spirit, and literally a demonic spirit. So this becomes something of, fire and kind of a fiery energy that permeates their art, and that's the difference between the two, right? So this says automatism, or the dictation of thought without control of the mind, implies the intervention of chance and the abandonment of the critical mind. We know that Surrealism placed the greatest hopes on automatic techniques of expression. These processes are of various types. The simplest of them is rapid drawing, executed, so to speak, with the eyes closed. Now, when it's drawing and visual artwork, again, it becomes something completely different, as if another spirit, as if you are emptying your mind and inviting another spirit to inhabit your body to guide the hand, right? Remember in The Witch, "I don't know how to make my mark." He said, "Let me guide thy hand." That's what it is. Executed, so to speak, with the eyes closed, in which the personality of the artist is expressed directly from the subconscious, a method that demands an unusual sense of tension, and one in which André Masson excelled. Other processes are of a mechanical nature, such as collages, which allowed Max Ernst to elaborate works of incomparable diversity and depth, or decalcomania, first applied by Oscar Dominguez and later perfected by Max Ernst. Skip the rest of that part. It's as if it occurs by chance. And of course, this also ties in with Freud and the Freudian, sort of Freudian obsession in the early 20th century. There is, among all the Surrealist artists, a desire to find over and beyond appearances a truer reality, a kind of synthesis of the exterior world and the interior world. Now, that's true in all art, but it takes on a different method with Surrealism, because it's absorbed into the surreal mind. It becomes underneath the real. They actually get this from Victor Hugo, is where they sort of get their description of and their definition of Surrealism, or the word Surrealism itself. The word itself was coined by Guillaume Apollinaire, the French poet, but I said, let's see. Oh, the other thing that's interesting about Surrealism is that it leads to what basically everything that you see at the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, or any of the MoMAs or modern art museums, which is what you call assemblage, which is could not exist prior to the 20th century, because assemblage, or ready-made art, as you call it, is like where you juxtapose various consumerist items and you place them for the viewer's emphasis in a setting where people are at first confused and then in a kind of wonder about why the various items are placed together, and then they give them a kind of a significance that is that seems almost metaphysical. But what it's saying is that the metaphysics of it are inverted, because, like, for instance, when Salvador Dali puts his telephone with the lobster on top. I mean, yes, you look at that and you go, oh, this is funny, or this is interesting, or this looks like art. It literally looks like art. That's what we think of art as looking like, right? A telephone with a lobster as a receiver, right? Well, and remember later Dali was famous for walking his lobster down the street in New York. But when you see that, you also go, what is this? It's a joke, right? But what is the joke though? Is it saying that modern life is a joke? Is it saying that people's beliefs are a joke? Is it saying that when you pick up a telephone, you're talking with the crustacean bottom feeder, and that's you? You're the crustacean bottom feeder? Are you the scavenger? What is it saying? At the same time, maybe it's saying nothing. And if it's saying nothing, then that is what I've said. I've said this, about art, in that what I've come to think and believe about art is that all art, no matter what art, is about two things, right? It's about our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. It's people questioning the nature of their existence and why are they here, and now that they're here, how are they supposed to make it with other people, right? What are we doing? That's what art is about. And especially when art is nihilistic, or like Tristan Tzara or Dadaist as a sub-branch of surrealism, it becomes about how art is saying that there is nothing. And that again is like, it's a double inversion of what the surrealists believe, because they don't believe in nothingness. They don't believe in nothing, Lebowski. Oh, they have to show at the Biennale, right? No, they, and that's, by the way, that is what the guy in The Big Lebowski is. He's an assemblage artist, right? He's a ready-made artist. He's putting things he's putting a clock with a shoe and a cigarette, and he's saying that this is a statement on, consumerism, and it means nothing. But by saying it means nothing, you're saying it means something, and you're saying that's your worldview, is nothingness. So that's what surrealism is. This says, let's see. Oh, we have the Sybil mentioned here, which we did in Picture of Dorian Gray. But the Sybil here is mentioned. Let's see. It says, already this work, written at the dictation of the unconscious, thus making it impossible to distinguish which parts were written by which author, gave proof of their indifference to the individual work, ornamented by a single signature. Collective experiences multiplied. There's the collective, right? This is collective experiences, but that hypes that will morph. Remember Morph, the character in Velvet Buzzsaw, into a literal collective of people in a kind of a communistic sense, because a lot of the surrealists were members of the Communist Party. During the so-called dream period, in which Robert Desnos, René Créval, and Benjamin Perret were particularly successful, the subjects went into a trance, and like the Sibyls of antiquity, uttered obscure words. His friends then proceeded to question him, and the strange dialogue that ensued was considered a model of true poetry, superior to all poetic forms then in use. A description of such seances can be found in Entrance of the Mediums. So, do you see that the way that these guys are into seances and into the Dadaist poetry is reflected now in AI poetry, right? So remember, the computer and AI cannot give you, they don't create, they only mimic, and they can't do ideas. They can only assemblage, right? Outsider art, ready-made art. They can only assemble information. So they would love this. They would love the kind of trash that people think is a wonder. And maybe it is a wonder in the sense that, oh, look at these words put together in a kind of a Burroughs cut-up method. But the meaninglessness is their meaning, right? They have no meaning. Ever since 1920, under Tristan Tzara's influence, this magazine Literature had given a preponderant place to Dada, in particular publishing a special issue, 23 Manifestos of the Dada Movement. But as I've already indicated, there was a fundamental incompatibility between the perpetual exhibitionism of the purely destructive spirit of Dada on the one hand, and the poetic faith that inspired the future surrealists on the other. It's page 14 of this great book. In March of 1922 is a fantastic year because a fantastic year, a year of wonder and fantasy. No, because 1922 and 1925 are the 2 years in the 1920s where we have this great flood of art and literature, right? We have the Jeff Steineffry Great Gatsby, we have T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, we have Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway's In Our Time in 1929, but 22 and 25 were big years for art and literature. And Andre Breton decided to assume sole direction of the new series of literature, which led to a final break with the literary avant-garde as well as with Dada. I mean, these guys are true avant-garde, if anything. You got to give them credit for that. They really are avant-garde. When we think of avant-garde artists, we still think of these surrealists, especially Andre Breton. I always kind of liked Andre Breton for the fact that he looks cool. He's like a cool looking dude. Like when I was a teenager and I got this book, I thought he was just kind of a cool, like, look at this picture. This picture is Andre Breton, Paul Eluard, Tristan Tzara, and Benjamin Perret. And this is Andre Breton right here. That dude looks like a surrealist artist would look, doesn't he? He's got like his beret on in the back. Like look at him in the center here. He's with Dali right there. That's Breton. I mean, he's just kind of a cool looking French dude. Here's all they have these sort of death mask pictures with their eyes closed. I mean, they did have a true literary movement, that is for sure. Here's edgy fedora Andre Breton in this picture. Can you see that right there? They got their one dame there in the picture. Here's Andre Breton with Diego Rivera in Mexico. Diego Rivera and his relationship with Frida Kahlo later. Here's Andre Breton looking emo, right? Dude looks like a French artist. And here he is old. I mean, he looks cool old. He's just a cool looking dude. I've always liked that guy. There's Man Ray. You see Man Ray up there. Man Ray obviously was the surrealist, and Man Ray is one of the guys who was I got a book of Man Ray over here. Man Ray is interesting because he was a painter and then became a photographer, and all of his art is corporeal, right? It's all pictures of usually women's body parts as objects, right? Jackie Treehorn. But he was also part of the group with what's the guy in LA? Dr. Jethro. What was the name of the doctor in LA and the Black Dahlia? And then his son did the investigation and then said that it was him. Doctor, I cannot remember. I got too many names floating around my head. I got all these surrealist names, but Man Ray was associated with them. And it's interesting that the Black Dahlia thing itself becomes a physical, real Man Ray photograph. And also, by the way, what happened to the Black Dahlia is kind of predicted and mentioned, not predicted by this book, but predicted by the writing that the book talks about. And that is, let's see, Decalcomania, and I got to find this passage. Because it talks about the convulsive beauty and how they believed that beauty is plastic expression, and I can't find it, damn it. This kind of comes out of Rimbaud, but it specifically comes out of Antonin Artaud and the Theater of Cruelty and Theater of Blood. And Antonin Artaud became a kind of a side figure of the Surrealists before he was kind of expelled from their group. And Artaud went on. Artaud's interesting because he's kind of like the Stephen Adler of the surrealists. He's too hardcore avant-garde, even for the avant-garde surrealists. And he just he pushes the boundaries like too much. He goes off to Ireland and he seeks a magical staff. Then he, he's a heroin addict. And then he ends up dying toothless and alone in an insane asylum. But they talked about convulsive beauty and how I think it was Tristan Zara. I can't remember which one who said this, but one of them said that beauty is a visceral, like vivisection, right? Yes, thank you, Jethro. Yes, Dr. Hodel. Yeah, George Hodel. Thank you, Jethro, to the rescue. And that's what Man Ray and Black Dahlia are, right? Where it's like the vivisection and shock and awe and terror are the visual signs of the surrealistic ideal of beauty that is imbued in what they say here. So we talked about the Sybil and the trance. Shouts out to Crispy. I mentioned Ireland and Crispy comes. Shouts out to Crispy. This says, while declaring himself a nonconformist, is page 18 of this book, he brings his essential prejudices to bear on those states of surrender, among the first of which is found the dream, and along with it, that state of vision advocated by Rimbaud. One must be a seer, make oneself a seer. This comes from Rimbaud's letter to, what was my note? His letter to Paul Demeny in 1871. Rimbaud was 16 when he wrote this. And Jim Morrison quotes it. I believe in a long, prolonged arrangement of the senses to attain the unknown. Although we live in the subconscious, our pale reason hides the infinite from us, which is a Gnostic Platonic idea of how the seer must make himself a beast. It must make himself mad, must experience all things in order to be able to relate them in verse. And that's what the surrealists took on. There it is. There is, too, the state of the medium, whose hand is no more than the instrument for transmitting a message sent not from the spiritualist hereafter, but from the actual self hidden by subconsciousness. So that's a Freudian way of looking at it. And also, Man Ray has an art piece. I don't know if you call it a sculpture. It's a hand reaching up on a pedestal. A disembodied hand, just like the disembodied hand in Velvet Buzzsaw, remember, that reaches down and hangs the guy. Finally, in its dual and indomitable opposition to the spiritualism of the Christian church, as well as to Cartesianism, which, according to its theory, paralyzes Occidental thought, Surrealism rehabilitates superstition and magic at the same time that it turns toward the Hermetic tradition, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, alchemy, which rests on the exercise of analogical thought. There you go. That is surrealism right there. So that is surrealism imbued with Hermetic and Kabbalistic thought by definition. Andre Breton says this in the manifesto, second manifesto of surrealism. Rimbaud's quoted again. Surrealism, let's see. Oh, here it is. Here's the convulsive beauty. Yes, so I'll just read this. I'm going to start to close down here so we can get over to Coteasy. Again, if you want to support me, please hit that super chat, hit that dono chat, ask me questions, and I will answer them as best I can. You can write me emails at madmaximalism with 2 X's at gmail.com, but I would prefer you do that here and send me a super chat with it, because I really need it. So I really would appreciate that. Let's see. Yes, and shouts out to Rachel again for that $10 super chat. Shouts out to Maddie for that $4. And I'm going to get to the super chats at the end also. So this says, it's kind of started with Duchamp and his, remember Duchamp did the Nude Descending a Staircase, which is a kind of an abstract or refractory painting. And then he did the Fountain, which is the urinal on the wall that we discussed. Shouts out to T.H. Thomas Henderson. But the term surrealism comes from Victor Hugo, of all people, who represents really what you would think that the surrealists would rail against, because Victor Hugo is the establishment French poet. I mean, Victor Hugo's funeral is famous for being a semi-state. I don't know if it was an actual state funeral, but a semi-state funeral at least. Digital Minefield says anything by Francoise Hardy, Brigitte Bardot, etc. fit that definition. LOL. Yeah, I was just talking to Toledo about Serge Gainsbourg, Jane Birkin. I like Serge Gainsbourg. Requiem pour un twister. Convulsive beauty. The Surrealists, founding their aesthetic on the hidden sources of inspiration, excluded from their ranks and spiritually condemned all art whose expression reflected a conception that was logical, rational, and in harmony with the universe. Didn't I say that? Didn't I say that at the very beginning? The line that connects the Greece of the Parthenon with Michelangelo, with Nicolas Poussin, Chardin, and Cézanne was not only strange to them, it was inimical. Yes, inimical. I'm reading too many words here. A lot of words. No, because the First World War almost physically separates them from the previous century. I mean, think about it. It's like, first of all, you're traumatized with the gas attacks and the what is it? What's the poem? That we analyzed at the beginning about a year ago? We analyzed the poem. Don't say it decorum est pro patria mori by Wilfred Owen, right? Where you have a green sea of death permeating and sticking to you inside the subterranean bunkers. And then you have the shell shock. And then you have the dead men. I thought I'd seen so many dead, right? And you have the wasteland and the valley of ashes and no man's land. And then you have the lingering effects of all this, and dead men with rotting corpses, and the rats are eating them, and then it floods, and then there's trench mouth. But then you have the literal gashes in the earth of the trenches, which is the demarcation line between you and the enemy. And that is almost like a physical representation of the line in consciousness between the traumatized people of post-World War I Europe and the Belle Epoque and the 19th century. Is in my interpretation. That's why they could not see any kind of line of congruity with Cézanne, right? And why I'm surprised by the thing about Victor Hugo. Now, of course they did. Of course they did have a line, and of course that's a physical line, and the whole thing is promulgated by the elites, and and they're just the pawns in the system, and they didn't have to believe in nothing. But I'm saying that's what Surrealism was about and what it did. Of Christian art, they recognized only the demonic or heretical. Of Europe, they retained only the archaic periods. Here we go. This is page 25 of this book. The Surrealists, having condemned all formal procedure in Western art, staked everything on the unusual or surpassing the real, either by the introduction of the dream or by abandoning themselves to the interior model. Baudelaire had already written it was Baudelaire. Of course it was Baudelaire in The Flowers of Evil. Baudelaire wrote, "The beautiful is what is bizarre." Furthermore, it should be noted that the Romantics in Germany and France were fully aware of what Breton and his friends designated several decades later as Surrealism. They had simply more respect for the tradition in the past and did not deny all value to the logical system. Good. Nevertheless, they did invent the terms supernaturalism and supernaturalism, in which very similar conceptions are to be found. Heinrich Heine said, in art, I'm a supernaturalist. I believe that the artist cannot find all his types in nature, but that the most remarkable ones are revealed to him in his soul as the innate symbolism of innate ideas at the same instant. Victor Hugo used the term on several occasions. The complete poet is composed of three visions: humanity, nature, and surnaturalism. For humanity and nature, vision is observation. For surnaturalism, vision is intuition. And he wrote this is from also the William Shakespeare, Complete Works, Paris, 1937. Should have just said supernaturalism instead of surnaturalism, because I'm sure that's what he meant. But the surnaturalism becomes something that is naturalistic and then underneath and beastly, or underneath the psyche in a Freudian sense and dreamlike. Whereas supernaturalism is something beyond, right? Which is obviously what the poet's inspiration and medium. The last part I'm going to read is, I'm going to skip the other Rimbaud references and spiritual realizations and plastic expression. They mentioned Gilles de Rais on page 87. And then, but then finally, I'm just going to mention this. This says on page 43, it says, they're talking about Hermes and the Hermetic thought. The second manifesto of André Breton, which besides personal articles of self-justification, contains a fine and convincing defense of the rights of inspiration and free expression, as contrasted with the narrowness of Marxist rationalism, concluded with this injunction: I request the profound, true occultation of surrealism, and certainly the occult tradition inherited from the magicians and the initiates and the illuminate confirm, played an increasingly larger role in the surrealist program, nourished in this domain not only by the classical texts, but by the contemporary works of Pierre Mabille, himself a grand initiate, Kurt Seligman, expert in sorcery, Malcolm de Chazal, Swedenborgian, Maurice Baskin, creator of fantasophy, René Allo, historian and analyst of the tradition, and Eugene Cancelliet, alchemist. And then he goes on to talk about Eliphas Levi and his dogmas and rituals of high magic, occult philosophy. And they also consulted Rimbaud, Villiers, Mallarmé, and Jarre, and how they were prophetic tribe of poets. So that is surrealism. So that's one epoch in art, one artistic movement that I thought we would cover. Again, shouts out to Chase Haggard for sort of bringing that up to me, recommending that to me the other day. And shouts out to Toledo for mentioning in her stories on Instagram Midnight in Paris. So the Midnight in Paris led on to this, and we did Velvet Buzzsaw, Surrealism, and Oscar Wilde and the Picture of Dorian Gray. If you have any ideas for any future streams, I mean, I have a constant line of things that I want to cover, but if you want to suggest anything, please do that. Please send a super chat and suggest it. Send it to me via Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, Dono chat it, put it in the super chats, or email me. If you want me to cover any art, any visual art, if you want me to cover opera, painting, sculpture, drama, poetry, any kind of literature, music, whatever you want me to cover, please do that. So let's look at the super chats real quick. Let's see. Here. We'll look at the super chats and let's see. Yes. Oh, shouts out to Hirsch for that $5 that he got earlier. Sent in earlier. Shouts out to David Franco for that $5. Shouts out to Digital Minefield Maddie. He said, ever heard of Libertine song Narcissus that references Dorian Gray? Any thoughts on that one? Hey, good call, Maddie. Because yes, of course I've heard Libertines, and well, I'll try to give a brief answer to this. What's his name? Peter. What's the name of the guy, the lead singer of the Libertines? Pete Doherty. That's it. I remember it. Pete Doherty. If you haven't heard Pete Doherty's solo album, Grace/Wastelands, great album. Fantastic album. Albion, Last of the English Roses, A Little Death Around the Eyes. Great album because, it's on Astralworks, and it's a great album because maybe Parlophone or whatever over there. But anyway, it's you know, I lived in England at a time when Pete Doherty was going through his troubles and was big and stuff. And I actually was in New York, you know, Libertines pre Pete Doherty, and then yeah, he dated Amy Winehouse, and I don't know what he's up to now, but you know, he's one of these like living examples of an absolutely troubled, decadent, you know, troubadour, poetic, you know, lyricist, musician. He did a fantastic he did a fantastic appearance where he played, I think, A Little Death Around the Eyes. Just YouTube it. And I really like his solo album. I was not a fan of Libertines. The other dude in the Libertines, Carl, what's his name? Carl Sabat, Carl something, Sabat, Carl something. He's friends with Charlie XCX. But anyway, that's a great album, Grace Wastelands. And to answer your question, yeah, you can see where Pete Doherty takes inspiration from Oscar Wilde. He loves Oscar Wilde and from Dorian Gray because Oscar Wilde is one of these figures who represents and who prefigures Pete Doherty-esque characters, kind of like Carl Barat. Thank you. Yeah, like Rimbaud does. Rimbaud, Oscar Wilde. Remember, we talked about this in the vampire stream when we did the film. God, there's so many names going around my head. What's the vampire film with Tilda Swinton that we did? Hold on, I gotta look it up. Tilda Swinton vampire film. Only Lovers Left Alive. Oh my gosh, we covered the film. It's just too many names. So remember that there was a scene where they had all of the. She goes to his house, and in Detroit, and there's a kind of a like there's a not a collage, but all of his inspirations are on the wall, and you're supposed to assume in the movie that they're all vampires, and it's like Kit Marlowe is in the movie, right? And then it's like Charles Baudelaire and Oscar Wilde is on there. Rimbaud is on. I think Rimbaud is on there. Byron is on there. They even mentioned Byron in the film, and so Oscar Wilde would also be an inspiration for Pete Doherty because he notoriously smoked gold-tipped cigarettes with opium. So this is like late Victorian era, early Edwardian decadence that informs the kind of art of Pete Doherty because the past is prologue. He's talking about it's basically the Albion as a decadent state in ruins that is beautiful, just like Baudelaire said, and that was Byron's definition of romanticism and beauty was the was ruins, right? It was the castle in ruins. But yeah, I have heard that one. So thank you for bringing that up, and thanks for that super chat. Really appreciate you. Shouts out to Tropes, who says, thanks for recommending The Mosquito Coast recently. It's a great film that I didn't know about until I saw your thumbnail the day before the stream. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you liked it. And I think that the movie, that movie is pretty faithful to the book in a lot of ways. And shouts out to Baginski, our Polish friend, who gave us that sponsor stream to do the Mosquito Coast. I mean, to do Thoreau, Paul Thoreau, not Walden Thoreau. So yeah, where is it? It's Paul Thoreau, Mosquito Coast. If you want to sponsor a stream, please do that. I appreciate it. I got some coming up. I've got the Canticle of Leibowitz, and then I've got the Ben Franklin one that we're going to do. That's going to be a trip because I'm going to reread the autobiography of Ben Franklin. I haven't read that since I read The Great Gatsby when I was 17. So we're going to see what we can see about Ben Franklin. Maybe we'll dive into the Hellfire Club and all that stuff. But that'll be interesting. That gets me out of my sort of wheelhouse, as they say, because I'm not really interested in like those figures. So I decided to take him up on that one because I think that was good. Also, we're gonna do Gone with the Wind sometime. We got a sponsor stream for that one. And so yeah, if you want to sponsor a stream, please do that. Drop me $100. That's I I think that's what's worth my time to cover all that because I dive into this. Let's look at the dono chats. We got a couple dono chats here. One from KF who says, "Thanks so much for the stream. Check out that Ivan Albright painting of Dorian Gray for the 1944 film." And then I will do that in just a second. Thank you so much for that $10. Awesome, KF. Thanks for that $10 dono chat. $10 from Kasi. Sorry, off topic. Just wondering if you're a fan of Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. Good question, Kasi. I mean, yeah, it is off topic. That's all right. I gotta say, I'm more of a fan of the idea of Peckinpah than I am of actual Peckinpah films, if that makes sense. With Straw Dogs, Peckinpah, I mean, like, I like the idea of these guys who push the boundaries of film and do, violent films in kind of traditional American settings, and that's cool. And the Wild Bunch is, I mean, the Wild Bunch is cool, but like when I think of the Wild Bunch, I always compare it to the Dirty Dozen because it's sort of same time frame. And the Dirty Dozen just is so superior to me of a film. But yeah, that's a good question. And maybe we need to dive into some of those films. Gargana Q sends 10 euros. No comment. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the Euro bucks. Really appreciate that. Let's look at. We got to look at that picture. So let's look at. I actually printed that out, and I have an article about that painting. So let's see. One more time. Ivan Albright. This will be the last thing we do. And then we're going to take off here and go over to Kotel. Let's see. Ivan Albright, Dorian Gray. Oh, yeah, this is the one that I had the article about. Yeah, so this painting... It's funny because this painting is a decent representation of the way that that I think that Dorian Gray's character would be, but it doesn't get it for me. That's why the literature is so much stronger than the actual. That's why the painting doesn't occur like in the. I mean, we get a painting on the cover of the book, right? But we don't get it. We don't get it within the book because the words paint the picture of his soul and of the painting better than the painting. And I think that it's interesting, but it's almost too surrealistic for me because, I mean, you look at, first of all, there's too much emphasis on the exteriors of Dorian himself. So we have the cat there. It's like, again, a familiar spirit. And we've got like the kind of undulating globular like animation going on around him, but that's not him. That all of the emphasis on his sin and the atmosphere of his sin should be on the character himself. All of the rest of it should be still life, right? Or should be like the normal subject of the painting. It's only, and I see that in the painting this is supposed to be an outer representation of, again, of like of his sin, but look at his character. He looks old there and he's got the big eyes and his hair's receding and his hands look bloody, right? Because he's literally got blood on his hands. But we don't need the kind of abstract surrealism. It's almost a mix of like Dali and Jackson Pollock and a kind of something almost latter day 20th century. So it's kind of predictive in that sense. It looks like there's a hand right where his belt is. And he's got a demonic shadow figure on his coat. That's pretty cool because it looks like the demons are coming to get him, right, in the painting. So that's cool. I like, that fits. But the painting doesn't seem, when I see that, it doesn't seem truthful to who Dorian is. This actually is probably much more truthful because that's Dorian when he's painted. See how the background there's the cat. It's a belly pock, right? And that's the picture of Dorian Gray, 1945. I get it. But that version of it is much more true to life, and all of the sin is going to be on just him, the figure himself, right? Not in the background. It does look like there's Luminate confirmed eye in the background. There's like a Nubian cat to the right, to his right, and there's the screen, which looks like it'll be the frame. It'll be over it's over the painting right there, right? There's a screen over the painting. It's red plush, so that makes sense to me. But anyway, thank you for that super chat. Really appreciate it. Okay, you guys, we've been going for a while here. So that is, I think, about all we got. Thank you again for the donations. Again, if you want to donate, please donate anytime. You can donate afterwards. And because I really need it. And I know it's your hard-earned buck, so I really appreciate it because it's hard to make a buck out there. So I really appreciate it. I'll be back. I don't know, maybe tomorrow. I'm still on spring break, so I'll be doing more stuff, and I will see y'all. Oh, TH says check your PayPal. Okay, I will. Thank you so much. Yes, TH always support me. TH, thank you so much. TH drops $10. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much, TH Thomas Henderson. Really appreciate you, homeboy. That means so much to me. It's hard to make $10 out there. And it's way easier to spend it, especially when you're hungry, which I am. I'm starving right now. So I'm gonna see if I have something to eat. So, but I don't. So thank y'all. Really appreciate it. Thank you for being here for Oscar Wilde, Surrealism, and Velvet Buzzsaw. And I will be back sometime later. Love y'all. See you. Keep on living. LIVIN. Peace.